At the Borealis room, Fridays always went pretty much the same way. The window table belonged to the Bennett crowd. The waitresses knew their voices before they even reached the dining room, and Harold Ness, the floor manager, personally brought their second bottle to the table before anyone had bothered to order it. Outside, wet snow clung to the glass and slid down in thin streaks. Inside, the room smelled of seared meat, expensive cologne, and the cigarette smoke that drifted in from the smoking room. Tonight, there were 5 of them. Bennett sat with his back to the window, angled so he could watch the whole room, turning a lighter over in his fingers. He'd quit smoking a year ago, but the habit of fidgeting with the thing had stuck around. The conversation wasn't going anywhere in particular. Reed was showing Bryn something on his phone. Tobin kept checking the time. Paige barely joined in. She sat with her cheek propped on one hand, half listening. Then Bennett set his phone down. "So, think any of you could land a marriage worth $3 million?" Bryn choked on her wine and set the glass down. "Marry who?" "Halvorsen." "Halvorsen who?" "Owen, from Millside, the IT guy at the plant." Bryn wrinkled her nose, trying to place him. "Oh, the one from the trivia night?" "That's the one," Reed smirked. "You're serious?" "Completely." "Okay, what's the catch?" Bennett gave the lighter another slow turn between his fingers. 3 months. Whoever gets Halvorsen to propose to her, on his own, walks away with $3 million. Tobin stopped checking his watch. "And if nobody manages it?" "Then I keep the money." Reed huffed a laugh. "Real generous of you." Bennett shrugged. "I just want to see which one of you actually knows how to get what she wants." Tobin studied him a little more carefully. Bennett sounded relaxed, almost lazy about it. But Tobin knew that tone. Once Bennett had made up his mind about something, there wasn't much point trying to talk him out of it. Bryn glanced at Paige. "So, Paige? $3 million. Paige hadn't said much all night. She was slowly pushing a slice of lemon around the rim of her plate with her fork. "Are there any conditions besides the wedding?" "Nope. Official marriage license, 3 months from today. After that, you can divorce him for all I care." "Why him, though?" Tobin asked. Bennett looked over at him. "Because he's perfect for it." "Perfect how?" "Quiet, modest, a total mama's boy pulling 52 grand a year." He leaned back against the booth and looked around the table. "So, bet none of you can get him to propose inside 3 months." Paige looked up. Until now, she'd barely been paying attention to the conversation. Now she held Bennett's gaze a beat longer than she needed to. "And if someone does?" $3 million. Paige glanced over at Bryn, who was watching her with a knowing little smile, already guessing where this was headed. $3 million. The thought landed fast and stuck. Her father had never really limited her in anything. He covered the condo, the car, the trips, the bills. But the moment she wanted something truly big, something that was hers, she'd end up having to explain why she needed it. $3 million was a completely different level of freedom. "I'll try it," she said. The table went quiet. Tobin turned his head. "You're serious?" Paige shrugged. "What's the big deal? $3 million doesn't fall into your lap every day." Bennett raised his glass. "To Halvorsen," he said. "May the man finally catch a break." Everyone but Tobin clinked glasses. Tobin just sat there, still watching Paige. It didn't feel like they'd simply come up with another way to kill an evening. Not anymore. That same Friday, Owen was sitting in the server room on the 3rd floor of the administration building. The air conditioning ran year-round in there to keep the equipment cool, so it was always a few degrees colder than the rest of the building. By midnight, the place had emptied out almost completely. All that was left was the steady hum of the server racks and the occasional crackle of plastic as the cables heated up. The supply tracking program had frozen again around 9 that evening. Second time this month. Owen had pulled a low chair right up against the server cabinet and was typing commands into the console. Lines scrolled up the screen one after another, faster than he could always catch. His phone buzzed in the jacket hanging off the back of the chair. "Yeah, Mom." "You still at work?" "Still at work." "I left you some porridge. It's on the stove. Warm it up first, don't eat it cold. Your throat's already—" "I won't eat it cold." "You're just saying that, so I'll let it go." Owen smiled, eyes still on the screen. "Mom, I mean it. I'll heat it up. Server's frozen right now. 20 minutes tops." "And yes, I took my pills, don't worry," she said, like he'd already asked. "Took them at 9, like I'm supposed to." "Good. You're probably starving. Mom, I'll call you back, okay? I really need to—" "Go on, get back to work." She hung up first, the way she always did, so she'd get the last word. Owen slid the phone back into his pocket and turned back to the console. 18 minutes later, the program fixed itself. Just a stalled queue. A handful of requests had gotten stuck in the system and couldn't push through. Happened all the time with equipment this old. The server had been begging for a replacement for years, but the upgrade budget only came around once every 2 years, and the last time had been 2 years before that. Owen logged the time of the crash and noted separately that this made the second incident that month. He looked at the entry for a few seconds, then decided he'd bring it up with Frank next week. If Frank forgot again, the hardware sure wasn't going to forgive him for it. Owen lived alone in a small apartment not far from downtown. Tonight he'd promised to swing by his mother's, help around the house, check in on how she was doing. It was about a 40-minute drive from the plant to her place. Walking wasn't an option in this cold, and Diane lived far enough from the center of town that it wasn't practical anyway. Near the gate, almost at the exit, someone called out to him from a car idling by the curb. "Halvorsen, still alive out here?" Owen recognized the voice before he even turned his head. The windows were half down. Expensive cologne and cigarette smoke drifted out from inside. Music played low. "Still alive," Owen answered, not slowing down. "Our IT guy," someone else called from the dark of the back seat. "Hey, come by sometime. Our computer's a disaster, we can't figure it out." Laughter from inside the car. The window went up. The car pulled away, spraying gray slush mixed with road salt along the curb. Owen watched it go for another moment, then dug his hands deeper into his pockets and headed for his own car. His mother's place was warm. The kitchen smelled like porridge gone cold. He spooned it onto a plate, put it in the microwave, and while it hummed, looked over the list taped to the fridge door. His mother's big, blocky handwriting. 3 items, underlined twice. Morning, afternoon, evening. The list had been hanging there for a year now. Owen still read it every single time. Monday morning, almost the entire administrative floor gathered in the plant's assembly hall. An announcement went out over the PA. An investor presentation would start at noon, and anyone not tied up on the line was encouraged to attend. Owen came straight from the projector setup. The night before, it had lost the signal from the laptop a few times, and Frank had asked him to stick around the hall, just in case. "Never know when it'll act up again," he'd said. Owen figured he was probably right. He recognized Arthur Langford right away. They'd never actually met, but Owen had seen his photo and heard enough about him. Langford carried himself differently around people. He didn't adjust to anyone else's pace. He listened closely and asked short, precise questions. The plant director running the presentation kept starting his answers too long-winded, catching Langford's look and cutting himself back to something shorter. Langford's daughter sat 2 rows ahead of Owen, near the aisle, half-turned toward the stage. She had a professional camera with her, a small, mirrorless body with a lens. Owen noticed her a few times, shooting the screen, then the room, then some small detail nearby. After the presentation wrapped, people started filing out. Owen stayed behind at the projector. He disconnected the cable, coiled it neatly, checked the adapter, and looked under the table to make sure nothing had been left behind. When he finally looked up, the hall was nearly empty. Except for the woman with the camera. She was standing by the shift schedule board, studying it with her head tilted slightly. Owen picked up his equipment bag and headed for the door. He was almost past her when he heard the quiet click of a shutter. He stopped, turned his head. She'd already lowered the camera and was fiddling with something on the lens, apparently absorbed in the equipment. Owen didn't ask. Could have been anything. The board behind him, the light through the window. He gave her a polite nod. She returned it, barely. Owen left the hall. Tobin called him Wednesday night. Owen could tell from his voice something had gone wrong. "Halvorsen, you home?" "Home?" "Listen, my project defense is tomorrow, 9 a.m. Committee's all set, everything was ready. I finished putting the file together today." Tobin was talking fast, tripping over his words. "I open the file now and it's corrupted, just won't open. I've been at this for 2 hours, nothing's working." Owen set his mug down on the table. "You copy it anywhere else? USB? Email?" "USB, Monday. But that's the old version. Half the sections are missing. I spent 3 more days fixing it after that." "Send me both versions." "Now?" "Now." A minute later, 2 files landed in his inbox, then another message. "Thanks for not blowing me off." Owen let out a short laugh. Tobin had clearly expected him to say no. People usually only came to him for help when things had gotten desperate. The file had corrupted itself during the last save. Most of the content had survived, but the document structure was broken and the program couldn't open it properly. Owen spent close to an hour on it. First, he tried the standard repair tools. No luck. So he went into the file itself, pulled the text out in chunks, and rebuilt the document from scratch. Some of the formatting he had to restore by hand. Around midnight, he sent Tobin the finished file. "Check the formatting. Some of it shifted, but all the text is there." The reply came almost instantly. "Bro, seriously, thank you." A minute later, another message. "Let me at least buy you a beer sometime. Feels wrong otherwise. You really saved me tonight." Owen looked at the screen for a few seconds. Tobin rarely invited him anywhere just to hang out. Usually, people only remembered him existed when something broke or they needed help. He typed back, "Sure, I'm in." The next morning, at work, another message came in. A photo. Tobin standing outside the college with a folder under his arm, giving a thumbs up. Underneath it, he'd written, "Passed, nailed it." Owen smiled, put his phone away, and got back to work. Outside the admin building, it was snowing. Fat, wet flakes stuck to the glass and melted almost instantly, leaving thin streaks of water behind. The program stalled again. Same cue as Friday, except this time there was an error message that hadn't shown up before. Owen sat down at the console and pulled up the system log, a long list recording everything that had happened with the program. 3 lines from the bottom, he found the crash time and read it twice. It matched, down to the minute, one of the earlier invoices. That one should have closed out 2 days ago, but it was still sitting in the system as unfinished. He pulled up a month's worth of shipment history, just to see whether this was a pattern or a one-off. A few minutes later, 3 consecutive invoices showed up where the final weight of a shipment leaving the plant didn't match the number on the paperwork. Not by much. A couple tons here, a couple there. Nothing you'd notice unless you were specifically comparing the numbers. But 3 times in 1 month was too many for coincidence. Something was causing it. Owen checked the dates again, then closed the history. Probably that same old server acting up. It had been overdue for replacement for years. New equipment had been promised the year before, but the purchase got pushed off again. Still, just in case, he copied the log onto his own personal drive, the one he kept in his top desk drawer, separate from the work USBs. An hour later, he was thinking about something else entirely and had nearly forgotten the whole thing. Until Thursday. A man Owen didn't recognize walked into the server room. "Excuse me, Halvorsen?" The man looked about Owen's age, in a neat sweater under a blazer. His badge hung turned around, photo facing in, so the name wasn't readable at a glance. "That's me. I'm from logistics, second floor. Access protocols are changing, and I wanted to check a couple things." "Go ahead." The man pulled out his phone. "You've got full access to the whole tracking system, right? Archives too?" "By role, yes." "And who else gets in there? Aside from management, I mean." Owen studied him a little more closely. The question felt off. That was a lot of detail to be asking about other people's access for a routine protocol check. "Depends what you mean by gets in. Everyone has their own login. If you need a breakdown by department, you're better off asking Frank. He manages access." "Ah, right. Makes sense." The man nodded, but it was obvious from his face he wasn't really listening to the answer. "Okay, I'll head over there then. Thanks." He left fairly quickly. Owen turned back to his monitor and only noticed the badge on the edge of the desk a few seconds later. Must have slipped out of his breast pocket when he pulled out his phone. Owen picked up the card. Same man in the photo. The name was printed below it in larger letters, but he didn't get to finish reading it. His phone rang in his pocket. "Mom." "Yeah, Mom." He turned away from the desk to take the call. It ran about 3 minutes. By the time Owen put the phone away, the badge was gone. He glanced at the door. The man must have come back for it while Owen was on the phone, quietly taken the card, and left. Owen stood there another moment, looking at the empty spot on the desk. Then he shrugged and sat back down at his computer. Who knew who wandered which floor at a plant this size, or why? The next call came in Wednesday, a little after 1. Frank burst into the server room without knocking, something that happened maybe once a year, if that. "Owen, drop everything. Langford's presentation just crashed, blue screen, and everyone in there's gone white as a sheet." Owen took his hands off the keyboard. "What presentation?" "The investor one, for the plant. Go. The director asked for you personally." The fifth-floor boardroom was packed with people in suits, 10 of them at least. On the big screen, instead of graphs and figures, there was an error message. Arthur Langford sat at the head of the table. In front of him sat a cup of coffee that had gone cold a while ago. He checked his watch, then the screen, then his watch again. "Hi," Owen said, walking over to the laptop hooked up to the projector. "What happened? Walk me through it." "We've been trying to figure it out for 20 minutes, one of Langford's people started. "The file opened, then it froze," Arthur cut in. "After that, the error showed up. Second half of the presentation's due in 15 minutes. The investors are already here." Owen sat down at the laptop. The system had tried to save the presentation locally and push the changes to the cloud at the same time. The connection had dropped halfway through the upload, and the program had saved 2 incomplete versions of the file. Neither one would open properly. He killed the sync, opened the temp folder, and found an earlier copy in there, almost whole. From there, he had to move fast. Owen rebuilt the presentation, checked every slide, and ran through it start to finish a few times. Someone was talking quietly outside the door. A phone rang somewhere down the hall. The boardroom smelled like strong coffee and expensive tobacco somebody had carried in on their coat from outside. 10 minutes later, Owen looked up. "It's ready." He turned the screen back toward the table. "Second half's completely intact. 2 slides in the first half I had to rebuild separately. I've got screenshots of them on my phone if you need them. I can pull them up. Content's all there either way." The room seemed to breathe out all at once. Someone leaned back in their chair. Someone else let out a quiet sigh. Arthur looked at the screen, then at Owen. "What's your name?" "Owen Halvorsen." "Who trained you for this?" Owen thought about it for a second. "Nobody. Taught myself." Arthur gave a short nod and turned back to the table. "Let's continue." Owen started packing up his gear: laptop, cable, adapter, charger. He was already at the door when he heard, "You are the one I photographed, aren't you, in the assembly hall?" He turned around. Tessa stood by the exit, holding the door so it wouldn't slam. "Probably," Owen said. "Never did figure out what you were shooting. The shift schedule, the light on it was nice." She said it completely seriously. "You just happened to be in the frame." "Ah," Tessa smiled. Owen was about to say goodbye, but she got there first. "You must fix a lot of stuff around here in your spare time." "More like my non-spare time. Not a lot of that to go around here." "Figured as much." She glanced at the equipment bag, then back at him. "I have a favor to ask, not work-related." "What kind?" "I photograph old buildings around town for an archive project. Old technical buildings, warehouses." "Someone told me your server room is interesting. All the equipment, the cabling." She looked past his shoulder. "Would it be all right if I came by sometime to shoot it?" "Sure." The answer came out faster than he meant it to, and Owen noticed that himself. "Just give me a heads up first. Nobody gets in off the street." "How do I give you a heads up? I don't have your number." He gave it to her. Tessa pulled out her phone and typed it in quickly. "I'll text you then." "All right." "Sometime this week, probably." "Deal." She slid her phone back into her pocket. Owen picked up his bag and headed into the hallway. Tessa lingered a moment by the door, then went back into the boardroom. He walked a few steps and only caught himself smiling once he reached the stairs. He wasn't even sure why. Bryn had a rented place on Maple Street. The windows looked out over a courtyard where younger kids gathered in the evenings, smoking by the garages, laughing, sometimes playing music off someone's phone. Paige would sometimes look down at them and remember being 18 herself. Back then, it had felt important too, standing out in the yard until dark, smoking one cigarette after another, waiting for someone to yell down from a window, "Get in here!" Bryn sat on the edge of the couch with 3 dresses laid out in front of her. Tomorrow she had a meeting with her father's suppliers, and she'd spent the last 10 minutes agonizing between the black one, the navy one, and the one she personally called too respectable for these people. "You're actually serious about this Halvorsen thing?" she asked. "You barely know the guy. You've said hi to him like twice." "So I'll get to know him." "Do you even have a plan? Or is it still just, I'll try?" Paige was lying on the bed, hands laced behind her head, staring at the white ceiling. "The plan's simple. We already cross paths sometimes. At the plant, around town. It's not exactly a big place. Before, I'd walk past, nod, and keep going. Now I'll stop, talk, see how he reacts. And how are you going to make that look natural? If you start hovering around him right away, he's going to get suspicious. That's why I'm not going to hover. I'll just happen to be around a couple of times. We'll talk, get to know each other properly. Bennett gave me 3 months. That's plenty of time." Bryn looked at her over the dress. "And if he just doesn't take the bait at all? Then I'll have to try harder." Bryn set the dress down on the couch and sat next to her. "Doesn't this feel a little, I don't know, lousy to you?" "What part of it?" "He seems like a decent guy. Quiet, never did anything to anybody. And you're about to drag him into all this for money." Paige was quiet for a moment. "Bryn, 3 million. I heard you." "No. Listen. 3 million. With that kind of money, I wouldn't have to depend on anyone, not my father, not Bennett, never having to ask them for anything again. And Halvorsen? What about him? People get divorced. It happens every day. Bryn didn't say anything to that. She just looked at Paige with the kind of look Paige had already learned to recognize. Bryn herself didn't fully believe in this whole scheme. On Thursday, Paige stopped by the Hearth Cafe again after her meeting with the suppliers. She wanted coffee and, ideally, 20 minutes of quiet. She was already getting ready to leave when Owen walked in. She recognized him instantly. He shook the snow off his shoulders, pulled off a glove, and got in line at the counter, eyes on his phone. Judging by the frown, something work-related was on the screen. Paige checked the time. She could leave. She could stay. She knew him about as well as people in a small town from different social circles usually know each other. They'd crossed paths a handful of times at plant events. Once he'd fixed a projector at a company function she'd gone to with her father. They said hi on the street, never really talked. Paige sat back down. "One more coffee, please," she told the waitress. Owen stepped away from the counter with his phone still in hand. Paige looked up. "Owen, right?" He stopped. "Yeah. I think we've run into each other a few times." Now he placed her. "Paige, I remember. You almost dropped a projector on us last year." She put on an offended look. "I did not drop it. I just set it down badly." He smiled. Paige nodded toward the empty chair across from her. "Want to sit? I'm bored sitting here by myself." "I was actually heading home." 5 minutes?" He checked the time, then looked at her. "All right." 5 minutes genuinely turned into half an hour. Dear friends, let's take a quick pause here. If this story's already got you hooked, show the channel some love with a like and a subscribe. And tell me in the comments, are you listening to this at home, at work, on your commute, or right before bed? I really am curious where and when you all listen to these stories. Thanks for being here with us. Now, back to the story. She asked him about his job. He told her about the plant, about the aging equipment and the never-ending technical headaches. Paige joked a couple of times about the local winter, which, in her words, had decided to just move in permanently. As they talked, she deliberately steered clear of the usual topics her crowd gravitated toward: cars, restaurants, money, whoever's newest purchase. Owen seemed to notice. At the very least, he relaxed and stopped checking the time. When he finally got up to leave, "You come here a lot?" Paige asked. "About once a week." "Then maybe we'll run into each other again." "Maybe." She smiled. "Have a good night, Owen." "You too." He left first. Paige watched through the window for a few more seconds as he zipped up his jacket by the entrance and walked off toward the intersection. The first step had gone easier than she'd expected. Friday, Tessa showed up just like she'd promised, camera on her shoulder, tripod bag in hand. She carried it down the hall, shifting her grip on it every so often. "I've only got half an hour," Owen warned her, unlocking the server room door. "Shift starts after that. No visitors allowed in here otherwise." "That's plenty." She stepped inside and stopped almost immediately. The fans in the server room hummed. Behind the glass of the racks, green and blue lights blinked, and somewhere, a relay clicked softly. The air was dry and cool, smelling of plastic, metal, and the dust the fans kept stirring up. Tessa raised her camera. "Wow." "What?" "It's beautiful." She aimed the lens at a bundle of cables. "Look how they're laid out, like a pattern." Owen looked at the same spot. "That's so I don't spend hours hunting for the right cable later." "Well, it came out beautiful." She started shooting. For the first 10 minutes or so, Tessa barely spoke. She walked the length of the racks, got close-ups of the indicator lights, the door lock, the thick bundles of cable, the ventilation grill. Then she started asking questions. What do these lights actually show? Equipment status. And if one turns red? That's usually when I start getting nervous. She laughed. Good to know you're human after all. Owen smiled too. 20 minutes in, she lowered the camera. You've been doing this a long time? Computers? All of it. Since the army, I guess. I was a signals guy. Came here after. Doesn't it get boring? Sometimes. He thought about it and added, but I'm used to it. Tessa looked at him, then back at the server cabinets. You're here alone most of the time? Mostly. Strange job. Everyone's got theirs. She nodded, agreeing. Tessa raised the camera again and moved toward the far rack. What's this one? Old controller, overdue for replacement, but it still works, so nobody touches it. Sounds familiar. You've got that too? Half my gear lives like that. He laughed. Talking to her came easy. She didn't rush to fill every silence, didn't try to sound like she already understood what she was asking about. If something didn't make sense, she just asked. When their time was almost up, Tessa packed the camera back into her bag. Thanks, I think I actually got more shots than I planned to. So the half hour wasn't wasted then. Definitely not. She slung the tripod bag over her shoulder and looked at the door. Would it be okay to come back sometime? If you give me a heads up first. Then I will. Good. She already had her hand on the door handle when she turned back. And thanks for actually explaining things. Usually when people answer questions like that, they give you 2 words and a look like you're wasting their time. I give 2-word answers sometimes too. Guess I got lucky then, she said and smiled. Owen smiled back. Tessa stepped out into the hallway, and he closed the door behind her and went back to his computer. The log lines were still blinking on the screen. The fans kept up their steady hum. 10 minutes left before his shift started. He saw Paige again on Saturday. She texted first. You working today? No. A minute later. Want to go for a walk then? It's not too bad out. Owen looked out the window. Light snow was falling, the wind pushing it along the row of houses. The thermometer outside read -15. He wrote back, Sure. Outside turned out colder than it had looked through the glass. The snow squeaked under their boots, and the wind kept finding its way under their collars. They walked through downtown first, then ducked into a small mall to warm up. It was stuffy inside after the cold, smelling of coffee, baked goods, and wet jackets. Then they headed back out. Paige gradually opened up about her family. Her mother had died young. Her father remarried later. Things with her stepmother never quite worked out, so Paige preferred living on her own, even though her father was always offering to help. You probably think I'm just like the rest of them, she said as they crossed the street. Money, cars. Owen looked at her. I try not to define people by who they hang around. Even a crowd like mine? Even that crowd. She adjusted her scarf and looked at him. So you still haven't filed me under them? No. Why not? Owen shrugged. You're the one out here walking with me, in -15. Paige laughed. Fair point. It's the point I've got. They crossed the street. The wind threw a spray of fine snow at their faces, and Paige pulled her coat tighter. All right, she said. Let's see what else you come up with about me. You could just tell me yourself. They crossed the intersection and Paige smiled. Just then, a car she recognized drifted slowly past them. Owen caught the plate and followed it with his eyes. A phone flashed in the back window. The car sped up right away and turned the corner. Paige had noticed it too. For a second, her expression shifted. She turned toward the nearest shop window. What is it? Owen asked. Nothing, just cold. She rubbed her palms together. Let's duck in somewhere. Sure. They stepped into the first cafe they came across. Warm air and the smell of fresh baking hit them from the door. Owen pulled off his gloves, set them on the table, and looked at Paige. She was already smiling again, telling some story about her stepmother. He forgot about the car pretty quickly, and within a few minutes their conversation had found its easy rhythm again. Tessa called Wednesday evening.
Up until then, they'd mostly texted, so Owen actually looked at the screen for a second, surprised. Hey, I had an idea. What kind? She paused for a second. You said your equipment's overdue for replacement, right? I did. And the money for it keeps getting pushed back? Yeah. Then I could talk to my dad. Owen sat back in his chair. Why would you do that? He's actually looking right now at where else he could invest at the plant, beyond the main contract. I could mention your infrastructure to him. If he's interested, maybe they'll upgrade the equipment sooner. Would make your job easier. Owen said nothing for a moment. Don't. Why not? Because that's Frank's job, and management's. I can tell him what needs replacing and why. After that, it's not my part of the job anymore. That clearly wasn't the answer she expected. I was just trying to help. I get that. It's just, things like this should go through the proper channels. Otherwise, it looks like I went over Frank's head and asked Langford myself, and Frank had nothing to do with any of it. So, what's the actual problem, then? Owen ran a hand over his face. The kitchen felt stuffy, even with the radiator turned almost all the way down. Outside, the snow whispered against the glass, and now and then, small pieces of ice tapped the window. I don't need your father's help. Owen, I'm not talking about money for you personally. I'm talking about the equipment. You've said yourself it's old. I know exactly how old it is. I work with it every single day. Exactly my point. Tessa, I can handle it myself. She went quiet. I just thought it would make things easier for you. And what if I don't want you making that decision for me? I wasn't deciding anything. That's exactly what you just did. Silence on the other end. Fine, she said finally. I understand. Owen could already tell the conversation was going somewhere bad, but he couldn't stop himself. Maybe that's just how it works where you're from. See a problem, make a call, get it fixed. I don't want that. Where I'm from? He closed his eyes. Tessa, no, I'm just checking. Are we back to talking about my crowd again? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He was quiet for a moment. I don't want to be someone who gets everything handed to him through his father. You understand? Her voice went quieter. I understand. Good. Then that's it. She hung up. Owen kept the phone at his ear a while longer, even though there was nothing but silence on the line. He set it down on the table, poured himself some water, took a sip. His throat felt dry, and there was a bitter aftertaste from the strong tea he'd had an hour earlier. He looked out the window. Snow was falling at a slant. The street lamp in the yard blurred into a smear of yellow. He couldn't tell whether he was still angry or just sorry he'd said too much. At Tessa's place, her phone sat on the edge of the table. She looked at it for a few seconds, then flipped it screen down. The kitchen clock ticked. On the stove, the kettle she'd put on before the call sat cooling. She'd forgotten to take it off in time. She got up, lifted it off the burner, and only then noticed her hands were shaking a little. God, you idiot, she said, quietly, to herself. 5 minutes ago, this had felt like a good idea. Now, offering to help her father with the equipment felt like the most tone-deaf thing she could have suggested. Bryn started noticing the changes about 2 weeks in. First, it was the phone. Paige sat at her kitchen table, drinking tea and scrolling through her messages. Outside, wet snow clung to the glass, and water hissed faintly in the radiator. At some point, Paige smiled,
without even realizing it. Bryn looked over. "What's that about?" "Nothing." Paige dimmed the screen and set the phone down next to her cup. The smile lingered on her face a little longer. "Halvorsen texting you?" "Yeah." "What did he say that's so great?" "Nothing special, really." Paige picked up her cup, took a sip. "He just types funny sometimes. Short, straight to the point. And then out of nowhere, he'll say something completely ridiculous." Bryn smirked. "You like him?" Paige set her cup down on the saucer a little harder than she meant to. "Don't be dumb." "I'm just asking." "Well, don't." Bryn raised her hands. Okay, dropping it." They talked for a few minutes about tomorrow's meeting, the suppliers, what time they needed to leave. But Bryn kept glancing over at Paige's phone, sitting by her elbow. Owen's name lit up the screen twice more. Bryn didn't say a word about it. Diane found out about Paige around the same time, though she hadn't met the girl herself yet. The name came up first over dinner. "What'd you say her name was again?" Owen set down his fork. "Paige." "Last name?" "Renwick." Diane froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Renwick." She frowned as if trying to place something. "What?" "Nothing, just that name sounds familiar." "Familiar to who?" "To me. Heard it somewhere, once." She waved it off and went back to her dinner. "Eat before it gets cold." Owen kept watching her a moment longer. "Mom." "What?" "You remember something?" "I don't remember anything. Name just sounds familiar, that's all." The fridge hummed quietly in the kitchen. Outside, thin trails of melted snow slid down the window glass. Owen shrugged and picked his fork back up. A minute later, the conversation moved on to something else. Tessa didn't call for almost a week. Owen noticed it happening gradually. A few times he caught himself reaching for his phone out of habit, checking the screen, then remembering he hadn't actually been expecting a message from her in the first place. On Thursday, she showed up outside the gate without any warning. He spotted her from a distance and figured at first he was mistaken. Tessa stood by the fence, hands shoved in her coat pockets, glancing at her watch every so often. When Owen came off shift, she looked up right away. "Hey." "Hey." "Sorry for showing up without calling. I wanted to talk." "Go ahead." She was quiet for a moment. "I shouldn't have gone to my dad with that. I should have talked to you first." "I told you. It's fine." "You were still upset, though." Owen let out a short laugh. "No, it's fine now." Tessa looked at him for a couple of seconds, then nodded. "Okay, so truce?" "Truce." "Coffee, then?" "Sure." She smiled, and Owen caught himself feeling glad to see it. They started walking toward downtown, and within a minute the conversation had drifted onto something else entirely. The street was nearly empty, old snow crunching underfoot, and wood smoke drifted over from a nearby yard, someone burning a wood stove. A few minutes later, Owen said, out of nowhere, "Teresa Langford." She turned her head. "What?" "Nothing. Teresa Langford." He said it deliberately, in the same tone they'd used to introduce her at the presentation. She laughed. "God, only my grandmother ever called me that." "When you were a kid?" "When I was a kid, and whenever she wanted to lecture me." "Who calls you that now?" "Nobody." She looked at him and smiled. "You're the first one in years." They walked a little further in silence. Then Tessa started talking about her father again, how he'd spent years trying to arrange her life the way he thought it should go, introduce her to some suitable person, get her a job at one of his companies, set up a nice, predictable schedule so everything would stay calm and manageable. "What do you actually want?" Owen asked. Tessa shrugged. "To work, to shoot, to go wherever I feel like going, whenever I feel like it. Basically, get to decide things for myself. She paused for a second, then smiled. And for my dad to ask, once in a while, what I actually want. Asking a lot? Judging by his reaction, yeah. Owen laughed. Sounds like him. You barely know him. I know enough to picture it. He walked the rest of the way home alone. His phone buzzed in his pocket as he was crossing the street, a routine notification from the plant's security system, the kind of message he sometimes got as the person responsible for infrastructure. He pulled it up while walking. Stopped. The log showed a login to his account from an external address. Tuesday. Evening. Owen read the line again, then checked the time. He stood there in the middle of the sidewalk while people walked past, boots crunching in the snow, a car's white exhaust trailing across the road. Tuesday. That was exactly when he and Paige had been walking downtown. He looked at the screen one more time. The times matched almost to the minute. Owen put the phone away and kept walking. He'd change his password that evening. That was good enough for now. He didn't feel like telling anyone what he'd just seen. Not yet. Monday, Frank walked into the server room wearing the face of a man who already knew Owen wasn't going to love what he was about to ask. Owen, the relay station out past Fenwick Junction's acting up again. Sounds like ice on the line. Someone needs to go out and look at it in person. Can't fix this one over the phone. Owen looked up from the monitor. When? Tomorrow morning. Driver already knows. Fine. He wrote down the address and turned back to the screen. Tessa found out by accident. Owen mentioned in a text that he'd be out of town all day tomorrow and might be slow to respond. A minute later, can I tag along? I haven't shot anything out there at all. My project's actually missing the outskirts. Owen looked at the message, set the phone down on the table, then picked it back up. You want to head out there in -25? A few seconds later, Tessa answered. I'll sit quietly in the car and stay out of everyone's way. Promise. He laughed. Fine, just dress warm. The morning came in clear and bitterly cold. Snow squeaked underfoot. Frost crept fast across the inside of the windshield until the cabin finally warmed up. The drive to the relay station took about an hour. Highway at first, then plowed gravel, then just a single packed track running between snowbanks. Tessa sat by the window, shooting the road. It's beautiful out here, she said. Strange almost. All this snow and not a soul around. Summers, dust, and mosquitoes, the driver said. Thanks. There goes the romance. The driver chuckled. Come back in summer. We'll show you the works. The relay station turned out to be a small metal shed behind a chain-link fence. Beside it stood a pole with a cable half buried in snow. Owen opened the junction box and immediately spotted ice built up on the connector. Frank called it, he said. Owen pulled off his gloves and stuffed them in his jacket pocket. The connector was tiny. Gloved fingers just couldn't feel the fittings. Tessa switched on her phone flashlight and crouched down next to him. Here? Yeah, a little to the left. She aimed the light at the box. Like that? That's good. Owen worked in silence. His fingers slowly went numb, and every so often he had to clench his hand into a fist before picking the tool back up. A few minutes in, Tessa noticed him rubbing his fingers. Really cold? Getting there. Want to take a break? Almost done. She didn't say anything else, just kept holding the light steady. A few minutes later, Owen straightened up, flexed his fingers to check they still worked, and bent back over the box. Tessa barely spoke the whole time. She stood next to him, chin tucked into her collar, glancing between his hands and the screen of her phone. When the signal finally came back, Owen closed the panel and checked the indicator light. Green. That's it. That's it? That's it. I somehow expected it to be harder. Usually it is. We got lucky today. By evening, they were on their way back when the truck got stuck pulling off the gravel road. The wheels spun in place a few times, throwing up snow. The driver got out, looked around, then opened the trunk. Well, that's that. Time to dig out. He grabbed a shovel and started clearing snow around the wheels. Tessa went back to sit in the cab, and Owen stayed to help the driver. After a while, Owen climbed back into the truck. His jacket was dusted with fine snow, and his hands needed a good long while to warm up again. "Any luck?" Tessa asked. "Not yet. Called for help." She shifted over to give him room. "Sit." Owen got in, rubbed his hands together, and looked out the window. The cab was quiet. The driver up front was scrolling through something on his phone. Outside, the field had gone dark, the few streetlights out there looking tiny against all the snow. A few minutes later, Tessa said, "You know, I like it here." Owen turned his head. "Here, where?" "Right here. Right now." She looked out the window. "Nobody's in a hurry to be anywhere. Neither am I." Owen didn't say anything. Tessa was quiet for a moment. "My schedule's usually packed. My dad, work, shoots, meetings. Sometimes even the weekends get booked in advance." "You don't like that?" "Sometimes I do. Sometimes I just want to cancel everything and disappear somewhere for a week." "What's stopping you?" She gave a small laugh. "Habit, probably." Owen looked at her and nodded. "I get that." She smiled and turned her eyes back to the road. Help arrived about 40 minutes later. They had the truck pulled free fairly quickly. By the time they got back, it was already dark. Outside her place, Tessa pulled off a glove. "Thanks for bringing me along." "Thank you. Get any good shots?" "A few. I'll show you sometime." "Sounds good." She'd already taken a step toward the house when she turned back. "See you tomorrow?" "Tomorrow." Owen waited until she was inside before he pulled away. Bryn brought it up to Paige like it was nothing, just casual news, without even noticing she'd hit a nerve. "Hey, so your Halvorsen apparently went out of town with Langford's daughter. Girls at work told me. One of the plant drivers let it slip." Paige was in the middle of pouring herself tea. A thin stream of boiling water hit the side of the cup, and her hand went still for a second. "Went where?" "Some site out there, fixing something. She went along to take photos. Then they got stuck, apparently. Spent half the day together." "And?" "Nothing, just telling you." Bryn shrugged and reached for the sugar. Paige said nothing. The tea overflowed the rim and ran in a thin line down the saucer. She only noticed once Bryn slid a napkin toward her. "Still hot, careful." "Right." That evening, Paige texted Owen. "How was the trip? Get everything fixed?" He answered a few minutes later, told her about the relay station, the cold, and the truck getting stuck on the way back. Tessa had been along too, of course. He mentioned it in passing, while describing how she'd photographed the road and the site. Paige read the message twice, then set the phone screen down. A minute later, she picked it back up. "That's great that she's helping you out. I just didn't realize you two saw each other that often." "Not that often, just kind of worked out that way." She started typing something else, deleted it, and left it at that. They saw each other again the next day. Paige answered a few times more slowly than usual, and when Owen was telling her something, she listened distractedly, glancing at him every so often like she wanted to ask him something. "What's going on with you today?" "Nothing." "You sure?" She was quiet for a moment, fixed her hair, and finally looked at him. "You're just with her constantly now." "With who?" "Langford." "Not constantly. We went out one time, for work." "And she was photographing your server room for work, too?" Owen frowned. Yeah. And she went with you out to that site. Paige, I'm just worried, okay? She said, quieter now. She's from a different world. You see that too, right? Money, connections, her father calling all the shots. Why do you even want to get tangled up in that? You're pretty much from that world too. Paige shook her head quickly. I'm different. She'd said it too sharply, and she knew it the second it was out. She looked off to the side for a few seconds, then stepped closer and hugged him. Sorry, that was a dumb thing to say. Owen hugged her back. It's fine. I just care, that's all, she said quietly. That's the whole thing. He didn't say anything to that. The whole situation was unfamiliar to him. He'd never really had to deal with a woman's jealousy before, and wasn't quite sure how to respond to it. All he could do was accept that Paige genuinely didn't like seeing him around Tessa. At the end of quarter company function, Owen sat at the long table in the admin building's dining hall. Plates of cold cuts passed between employees. Someone had already poured whiskey into glasses, and the kitchen smelled of fried onion and hot meat. Reed sat down next to him with a plate of appetizers. They talked about nothing in particular. Work, Frank still trying to squeeze money out of the budget for equipment. Then Reed nodded toward Owen. Hey, where do you guys keep the old paperwork? Still in the archive on the second floor? Some of it. Some's already been digitized. Got it.
Reed speared a piece of cheese with his fork, chewed, then asked, out of nowhere.
The old shipping invoices in there too? Owen looked at him. Which ones specifically? I don't even remember. The ones from a few years back. Right then, Reed's phone rang. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and stood up almost immediately. Give me a sec. He stepped over to the window to take the call. Owen happened to glance after him and caught the contact name on the screen. G.S. A few seconds later, Reed turned toward the glass. Owen picked his fork back up. He forgot about the archive question almost instantly. No telling why Reed would need old paperwork. But the name on the screen stuck with him. Bennett came over to him on his own, something that hadn't happened once in all the times they'd crossed paths through mutual friends. This was about 20 minutes after his conversation with Reed. Halvorsen, Bennett said, sitting down across from him with a glass in hand. Been a while. If we're being honest, it's basically never, Owen said. Fair. Bennett swirled his glass, studying the amber liquid inside. Hey, you remember the school programming competition? Owen studied him a little more closely. I remember. Why'd you even get involved in that? You weren't competing, you were just helping the teacher. I was grading entries. They asked me to. Bennett smirked, but his eyes stayed serious. And you flagged my work against someone else's. Yeah. Ratted me out. I showed the teacher the overlap. What happened after that was on him. Bennett took a sip and leaned back in his chair. They told me right before the awards, in front of my father. You believe that? Whole room sitting there, my dad in the front row, and I get pulled from the ceremony over some review. That was 11 years ago. I know exactly how many years it's been. Bennett set his glass down. It's just weird. Sometimes I wonder if you did it on purpose to set me up. Owen looked at him. Why would I have done that? No idea. Maybe I'd pissed you off somehow. We weren't exactly great to people back then. I was checking code. Saw a match, showed the teacher. That was it. And that's still it? What else would there be? Bennett studied him for a few seconds, then smirked. Nothing. Forget it. He finished his drink and stood up. All right. Glad you're not holding a grudge. I'm not. Bennett nodded and went back to his table. Paige, Bryn, and a few others from their crowd were sitting there. He said something to Paige, low. She answered, but Bennett cut her off right away. From where he sat, Owen couldn't make out the words and didn't try to. Later that night, at home, Bennett texted Paige. Time to speed things up. She was sitting on her bed, legs tucked under her, holding the phone with both hands. She read the message, opened the keyboard, typed a few words, and deleted them. Then she set the phone down beside her and stared at the screen for a long while. Paige brought him to the group's monthly get-together toward the end of the month. She'd been working up to it gradually, telling him a few times that the crowd's actually decent, they just don't like to show it. "We're all meeting at Bennett's Friday. Want to come with me?" Owen looked up from his phone. "I barely know half those people." "So now you'll get to know them." He thought about it for a moment and nodded. "All right, let's do it." And that was how he ended up at Bennett's place. The condo took up the top floor of a new building not far from downtown. The wall of windows opened onto the whole city. Dark streets, scattered car lights, glowing windows in the buildings below. There was a quiet in the apartment that felt almost unusual for this crowd. Ventilation hummed steadily somewhere overhead, and dishes clinked in the kitchen. "There he is," Bennett said, opening the door. "Come in." Owen took off his jacket, said hello to everyone, and grabbed a glass of juice from the kitchen. For the first half hour, he mostly listened. The conversation around the table was about people he didn't know, trips he'd never heard about, arguments over which restaurant to hit after the holidays. Owen tried a few times to jump in, but the conversation had already moved on by the time he did. Tobin was the first to notice. "Hey, you work with computers, right? I've got some program at work that's been crashing for 2 months straight." "On save?" "Yeah." "Which version?" "No clue, some old one." "Check the version, update it." "I don't even know where to look for that." "Show me sometime. If I see the program, I'll tell you what to do about it." Tobin dragged his chair closer. Within a few minutes, 2 more people had joined the conversation. Someone remembered a similar horror story about their laptop. Someone else started arguing that half the office software out there ran on pure luck. The conversation gradually loosened up. "Hey, did you actually rebuild his whole project overnight?" Bryn asked. "It wasn't a whole rebuild," Tobin said, waving it off. "The file broke. Owen put it back together." "You told us everything was gone." "That's what I thought at the time." "So that's why you texted everyone at 2 a.m. saying your life was over." Tobin laughed. "Guilty." Owen laughed along with everyone else. By the end of the night, he'd almost forgotten that an hour earlier he'd felt completely out of place there. Bennett came over to him a few times, topping up his juice, asking about work, about the plant, about what it was like carrying that much responsibility. He talked calmly, without his usual edge of mockery. At one point, Owen noticed Bennett glance across the room at Paige. It was quick. Paige noticed it too and looked away right after. Owen didn't say anything about it. 2 weeks later, the whole crowd headed out ice fishing. The drive to the lake took about half an hour. Then came unloading the snowmobiles, the ice augers, the coolers of food. The morning turned out clear and bitterly cold. Snow crunched under their boots, steam rising off the hot tea in the thermoses. Tobin turned out to be a surprisingly patient teacher. "Hold it like this." "Like this?" "No, hand lower. There. Now press down." The auger fought hard against the ice. Owen quickly felt the heat build up under his jacket, even as his fingers, oddly, started going numb. "Okay, hand it here," Tobin said. "You're about to go down the hole with the auger." A few minutes later, the hole was ready. When the fish finally started biting and they pulled 3 perch in a row, both of them celebrated like the whole day had been about exactly those 3 fish. Reed turned out to be a completely different person that day, too. He told stories from work, doing impressions of his boss, shifting his voice and expression so convincingly that even Owen laughed out loud more than once. At one point, Reed sat down next to him and held out a thermos. "Here, tea's still hot." "Thanks." "Your lips are already going blue." Even Bennett was easier company that day. When he noticed Owen rubbing his frozen fingers, he dug through the snowmobile and pulled out a spare pair of gloves. "Here, these are warmer." What about you? I've got another pair. Owen took the gloves. Thanks. Don't worry about it. They rode back after dark. The snowmobiles moved in a line, headlights carving the white trail out of the darkness, snow dust kicking up off the treads and settling on their jackets. Owen sat behind Tobin, watching the lights up ahead. A lot had changed over the past few weeks. People talked to him differently now, not looking down at him, inviting him along. Maybe Paige had been right. Maybe he really had kept his distance from these people, for no good reason. On the drive home, Bennett ended up in the same vehicle as him. For a while, they rode in silence, listening to music playing low. Then Bennett asked, "Hey, do you actually see everything that happens in your system there? All the activity?" "What do you mean?" "You know, invoices, shipments, all of it." Owen laughed. "Sure, I see it. That's the job." "Makes sense." Bennett watched the road. "Must get boring." "Sometimes." That was the end of the conversation. Owen kept watching the dark fields and scattered streetlights out the window for a while longer. Bennett's question stuck with him. Professional habit made him keep anything work-related filed away in his head, even the most casual conversations. Tessa came to see Arthur that evening, on business. She needed him to sign off on paperwork for her old building's archive project. While she waited for her father in the outer office, voices drifted over from the next room. The door wasn't fully closed. She recognized one voice right away, Bryn's. So what now if she's actually caught feelings? Bennett said by end of winter, we're seriously running out of time. She'll cool off, Reed answered, it sounded like. Not the first time one of us has gotten a little too into a mark. Always gets finished off in the end anyway. Nobody's canceling the money. I just feel kind of bad for him, Bryn said, quieter. He has no idea what the stakes even are. Tessa stopped. She hadn't caught who exactly they were talking about, and she'd missed the start of the conversation. But a few words lodged themselves in her head. Stakes, money, no idea. That was enough to make her stop listening. She stepped away from the door and went back to the outer office. A few minutes later, Arthur appeared, laid the documents in front of her, and started explaining where she needed to sign. Tessa looked at the papers but barely took in a word he said. Sign here. And here, too. Mm-hmm. Tessa? Yeah, sorry. She signed the papers and drove home. That evening, she sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, phone in hand. Texting Owen turned out to be harder than she expected. Owen, there's something I need to tell you about Paige. She read it back and deleted it. Typed, okay, I don't know how to say this, but deleted that too. Eventually, Tessa just hit call. Hey, Owen answered. Something wrong? Owen, be careful with Paige. He was quiet for a second. Why? I overheard something today, by accident. Not all of it, just a piece. They were talking about stakes, about money, and that someone's apparently caught feelings for you, but she still has to follow through on it. Follow through on what? I don't know. Tessa gripped the phone tighter. I really don't know. I only caught a few sentences. Silence again on the other end. Tessa, wait, are you sure you're reading this right? I'm not sure. Who was talking? Bryn, and I think Reed. And they said Paige's name specifically? Tessa went quiet. I didn't hear her name. Owen exhaled. Then how do you know it was about her? I don't. It's just... She stumbled. It's just... It all lined up. Tessa, this could be about someone else entirely. It could be. Then why are you telling me this? She closed her eyes. because it felt like someone's trying to pull you into something. Owen didn't answer right away. "Okay," he said finally. "Thanks for telling me. I'll keep an eye out." "Owen." "What?" She wanted to say something more, but couldn't find the words. "Nothing." "Good night, then." "Night." He hung up. Tessa sat still for a while longer, looking at the dark screen of her phone. She could hear herself how thin her warning had sounded. She had no proof, just a handful of overheard words that she couldn't shake now, no matter how hard she tried. Paige was home alone when another message from Bennett came in. Short, businesslike, almost like a work reminder. "How's it going? Clock's running out." She read it, then opened the whole thread with him. Dozens of messages like that from the past few weeks. One after another, they dragged her back to where this had all started. $3 million, 3 months, a wedding, a divorce. A deal that needed to get finished. Paige selected the whole conversation and deleted it. 5 minutes later, she opened her deleted messages and restored every one of them. She sat there a while, staring at the screen. The phone lay next to her on the bed, and she left it alone for a long time before finally opening her thread with Bryn. "I think I'm in over my head." She read it back, imagined how Bryn would respond, then imagined what Bennett would say if he found out she was even starting to have doubts. Delete. Paige set the phone aside and lay back, staring at the ceiling. A few minutes later, she picked it back up. She never sent the message to Bryn. She met Owen's mother the following weekend. It had been his idea, and to his own surprise, he'd been more nervous about it beforehand than he expected. "Mom, this is Paige." "About time," Diane said, with the kind of good-natured sarcasm that only came out around people she was close to. "I was starting to think you were hiding her from me on purpose." "Not hiding her," Owen said, going a little red. Lunch went smoothly. Paige praised the food, asked Diane about her cooking, kept the conversation going. From the outside, everything looked plenty warm. But Diane noticed a few small things. When Owen mentioned her heart condition, Paige just nodded and steered the conversation elsewhere right away. When it came time for tea, she automatically put 2 spoons of sugar in Diane's cup, even though Diane hadn't taken sugar in years. "No sugar for me," Diane reminded her. "Oh, sorry." Paige smiled and pulled the spoon back out. A small thing, probably nothing but a small thing. But Diane had learned, over the years, to notice things like that. Life had taught her, sometimes what a person does without thinking tells you more than anything they say at the table. After they left, she stood washing the same cup for a long time. It had been clean for a while already. Water just ran over the white porcelain while Diane kept working the sponge along the rim, staring out the window. "Sweet girl," she said quietly. Then she paused. "Just not quite from around here somehow." She couldn't have explained exactly what had caught her attention. Everything about Paige seemed right on paper. Well-mannered, pretty, spoke well, and Owen was clearly happy around her. And still, something wouldn't sit still in her mind. The incident happened at the distribution hub in Building 2, in the middle of a shift. First, the hallway filled with the smell of burning insulation. Then the alarm went off, and a minute after that, smoke started pouring out from behind one of the panels. "Everybody out!" Frank shouted, but stayed put himself. Along with 2 other techs on duty, he was trying to trace exactly where the fire was coming from so they could cut power to that section without killing electricity to the whole floor. Owen got there within a minute of the alarm. The server room was right next door, and out of everyone on shift, he knew the wiring diagram for that hub better than anyone else. "Here," he said, pointing at the panel putting out the thickest smoke. "If it shorted here, we need to cut the whole B line. Otherwise, it'll travel down the circuit." "Cut it," Frank said, short and sharp. Owen moved fast. One breaker, then another, then a third. He kept checking the panel readouts, making sure they weren't knocking out systems that needed to stay live along with the faulty section. Breathing got harder by the second. Acrid smoke clawed at their throats, eyes watering, the alarm hammering their ears, while, somewhere beyond the wall, people were already running. A few minutes later, the smoke started clearing. They'd managed to isolate the short before the fire could spread any further. Once the fire crew arrived, checked the room, and cleared everyone to go back in, Frank came over to Owen. He was still breathing hard from running the floor. "How do you know that layout so well? I wouldn't have pulled it up that fast myself." Owen wiped a soot-streaked palm on his pant leg. "I just remember where things are." Frank looked at him and laughed. "Good habit to have." He clapped Owen on the shoulder and went off to deal with the aftermath. Later, while they were putting together the incident report and cross-checking documentation for the hub, Owen dug back into the wiring diagrams. That's when he found something else. On paper, part of the cabling ran nowhere near where he'd actually seen it with his own eyes. One piece of equipment wasn't in the documentation at all, even though it sat right there in the cabinet, wired into a live line. Owen cross-checked the diagrams, one after another, for several minutes, then brought the paperwork to Frank. "Look at this. The cable's routed on a totally different path here. And this unit isn't in the registry at all." Frank took the documents, scanned the pages. "Might just be old diagrams." "For some sections, sure. But this piece of equipment was installed after the last update." Frank looked the papers over again. "Weird. That's what I thought too. Which means someone should have logged this." Frank glanced at the schematics one more time and slid them into a folder. "Owen, you did your part here. Leave it at that from here on." "Why?" "Because it's not your area anymore. If the equipment's connected to our network, sure, we need to know it's there. But who installed it and why it's missing from the old diagrams? That's for someone else to sort out." Owen looked at the folder. "What if it's affecting our network?" "Then you tell me. I'll take it up with management myself." He was already heading out when he added, "Just don't go around the offices with these papers trying to figure out who installed what yourself. People here don't like that." "Understood." "Good." Owen watched the door close, then turned back to the wiring diagram on his screen. A minute later, he opened the work log and wrote down the hub number, the date of the incident, and the discrepancies he'd managed to spot, just in case. Paige set up a meeting at a cafe on the square, not their usual spot, deliberately somewhere in a different part of town. She got there early, sat by the window, and barely touched her coffee. When Owen sat down across from her, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "My dad called yesterday." "What'd he say?" "He wants me to move to Calgary with him. Says I've learned enough by now, it's time I worked alongside him. He's the one who taught me all this, brought me into the company. Now he figures I should be right there with him." "What'd you tell him?" "That I don't want to." Owen looked at her. "And?" "It started off civil. Then he got angry." Paige paused, choosing her words. "He said as long as he's paying for me, I don't get to just do things my own way. That the apartment, the money, all of it's from him. And then he actually said, if you were married, that'd be different. Live here with your husband, fine by me. But if you're planning to stay here alone, drop everything. What exactly are you going to do?" Owen frowned. "He actually said that?" "Pretty much word for word." She took a sip of her coffee, gone cold by now. "And then he started in on the company. Said, fine, stay. But who's going to run things? You think I'm going to fly in from Calgary every month just to check up on you?" "What did you say back?" "That I'd figure something out." "And?" "He said I still don't understand enough." Owen let out a short laugh. "Sounds familiar." What does? When someone older assumes that if you don't know something, you must not understand anything at all. Paige smiled. Exactly that. She was quiet for a moment, then looked at him. I'm still kind of scared, though. Of what? If I stay, my dad might just stop paying for the apartment. He's capable of it. He'll say anything in the heat of the moment, and then he won't back down. Owen answered right away. Then move in with me.
Paige didn't even smile. She just looked at him.
Are you serious? Of course. Owen, we don't even live together yet. So? Doesn't that scare you at all? He shrugged. I live alone. There's a room. I've got a job. I'm paying for the place either way. If you actually need somewhere to stay, you can stay with me. Paige looked down. What if my dad finds out? Then he finds out. I can tell him myself that you're staying. Paige shook her head right away. No, don't. Why not? He'll just end up arguing with you. I'll talk to him myself if it comes to that. All right. Owen nodded and looked back out the window. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then he said, Hey, I had an idea just now. Paige turned to face him. What kind? Nah, forget it. Come on, tell me. It's not worth it. Owen, please. He laughed. Picture this. If we got married, what would your father say then? She looked at him for a few seconds, then asked quietly, Are you being serious right now? I don't even know. It just came to me. Paige laughed softly. Tears suddenly welled up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped one away. What's wrong? Nothing. It's just... She looked at him again. You get that I might actually take that seriously? I'm saying it seriously. She went quiet. Really? Really. You know it's early, right? This is really fast. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Doesn't that scare you? Owen laughed. Terrifies me. Paige took his hand, held it for a few seconds, and leaned in toward him. She kissed him, brief, almost shy, and didn't pull away right after. Scares me too, she said quietly. She looked at him again, and this time her smile was real. Okay, so how would you even picture this working? Not sure yet. You stay here, live with me, I work, you do your thing, and we talk to your father like two grown adults. And if he's against it no matter what? Owen shrugged. Then at least it'll be our call to make. That same evening, Tessa clashed with her father again. I don't understand why you keep inserting yourself into my life, she said, standing in the doorway of his office. Now you've even been talking to HR about my job. Arthur set down the documents. I care about your future. You're deciding it for me. Those aren't the same thing. Tessa, you're 27. It's time you figured out what you want to do instead of running around town with a camera. Maybe that's exactly what I want to do. You can't make a living photographing old buildings. Have you ever once asked me what I want? Not what's good for the company, not what you think is right, just what I want? Arthur rubbed the bridge of his nose, tired. I don't want you repeating my mistakes. Which ones exactly? Arthur looked at her. I thought I knew better than everyone too, once. I got married because it was the right thing to do. Suitable family, decent man, everything by the book. Tessa didn't interrupt this time. And were you happy? She asked. Arthur was quiet. For a while, maybe. Then it became clear we were just living next to each other. After your mother died, I thought a lot about what I could have done differently. Tessa stood by the door, watching him. Then you should understand why I don't want you choosing for me. Arthur looked down. I understand. I don't need the life you've already got planned out for me, Dad. I need my own. She left and quietly closed the door behind her. At a mutual friend's birthday party, Bennett drank more than usual. Later, when Paige stepped out onto the balcony for some cold air, he followed and pulled the door shut behind him. "Why so wound up lately?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "You think I don't notice?" "Just tired." "Tired of what? You're already halfway there. Just need to close it out. You said yes yourself, that night, at that same table."
"I haven't forgotten." Bennett smirked and took a sip.
Paige looked down for a while at the sparse traffic and the yellow smears of streetlights on the wet pavement. "What happens after?" "After what?" "After the wedding." Bennett shrugged. "We'll see." "Meaning?" He looked at her like the question struck him as strange. "Halvorsen sees too much at that plant. Documents, shipments, always checking something. My father's had it with him for a while now." Paige turned to face him. "So?" "So what?" Bennett smirked again. "He'll have a wife, a family, his own things to worry about. Maybe he'll stop poking his nose where it doesn't belong." "And if he doesn't stop?" Bennett finished his glass. "Then they'll find something to keep him busy with." He said it almost casually, like it was some minor detail. Paige stared at him for a few seconds. "Who's they?" Bennett just shrugged. "Better you don't know." She didn't answer and went back inside. A few minutes later, she said she wasn't feeling well, said her goodbyes, and drove home. That night, Paige sat on the edge of her bed for a long time without changing out of her clothes. Her phone lay next to her. She opened her thread with Owen and started typing. "There's something I need to tell you. It's important." She stopped. If she told him about Bennett now, she'd have to explain how she knew any of it. And that meant explaining the bet. The $3 million. That night at the Borealis room, when they'd all decided she'd be the one to get him to propose. After that, Owen would never be able to look at her the same way again. She deleted the message. Then she opened her old thread with Bennett. Dozens of short messages from the past few weeks. Scrolling up, Paige found a video someone had recorded that first Friday at the Borealis room. In the clip, Bennett laughed, glass in hand. "Bet none of you can get him to propose?" Someone laughed off camera. Bryn shouted something, and then Paige's own voice. "I'll try." The video ended in laughter and clinking glasses. Paige watched the whole thing, even though she already knew every second of it by heart. Bennett could send it to Owen any time he felt like it, out of spite. Or if he decided she was dragging this out too long. She locked her phone and set it down beside her. The wedding first, Paige thought. I'll figure out the rest myself after. Except now, she wasn't so sure anymore that she'd actually be able to protect Owen from the thing she'd pulled him into in the first place. Paige's father called her Wednesday evening to say the Calgary move was speeding up. She might have to leave in as little as 2 weeks. Paige told Owen that same night. "So we barely have any time left," she said, sitting in the kitchen, turning a cup of cold tea in her hands. "We already decided," Owen reminded her. "We did decide, but—" she trailed off. Owen understood what she was thinking. "Scared?" "A little." "Me too." Paige looked at him and smiled. "Then maybe we really should stop putting it off. Let's do it." That same evening, Owen called his mother. "Mom, I've got news. Paige and I have decided to get married." "Now that's news," Diane said after a short pause. "When?" "Soon." "Soon meaning when, exactly?" "We want to sign the papers in 2 days." Silence again on the other end. 2 days? Diane repeated. You're just hitting me with this out of nowhere? It came together fast, Mom, but we've decided. Diane didn't answer right away. Well, if you've decided. Tessa heard about the wedding from Bryn 2 days before the ceremony. Bryn called her that evening, apparently just to share the news. Can you believe it? They're signing the papers in 2 days. Who is? Paige and Halvorsen. Tessa was quiet. Bryn, are you sure Paige actually wants this? A short pause on the other end. Why are you even asking that? Because last time I overheard something. Tessa, you're back on this again? I'm just asking. Bryn sighed. Look, Paige can handle her own life. She's basically already seen this through to the end. The end of what? That's not what I meant. Bryn, don't drag me into this, okay? She said, quieter now. If she's decided, then it's because she wants it. That's all. After that, Tessa understood that Paige really had been the one they'd been discussing behind her back that day, and that Owen might have no idea what he was actually walking into. The next day, she drove to his place. Owen opened the door and looked at her, surprised. Tessa? What's going on? I need to talk to you about Paige. He led her into the kitchen. Tessa got straight to it. I talked to Bryn yesterday. She let something slip about Paige again. I didn't get the full picture, but Owen, something's off there. Off how? I don't know. That's the whole problem. Owen looked at her. Tessa, this is the second time you've come to me with this, because I really think you need to know. Or you just don't like that Paige and I are together. Tessa frowned. You think I'm jealous? What else am I supposed to think? I'm not jealous. Fine, then what's actually going on? I overheard something. Bryn knows something too. She just won't say it outright. Owen was quiet for a moment. So you want me to go corner Paige and interrogate her right now? No, just talk to her. Yourself. I'll talk to her if I need to. Tessa realized she wasn't going to get any further right now. Fine, I just wanted to warn you. Got it. She picked up her jacket and headed for the door. Bryn confirmed the date. The official marriage registration was in 2 days at Red Cedar Municipal Hall on Founders Avenue. Small, no guests, no reception. Tessa thanked her and said goodbye. At home, she opened her drafts again. 3 unfinished messages to Owen still sat there. She read through them one by one, then selected them all and deleted them. On the morning of the wedding, she finally sent one. Congratulations. I mean that. She sent it and set the phone screen down. Over the next 2 days, Bryn helped Paige with the dress. A simple one, bought in a rush, barely tried on. They fussed over the hem, argued about shoes, tried to figure out what to do with her hair. At one point, Bryn set down her needle. You've been off these last few days, not yourself. Tired? Tired of what? You're getting married in 2 days. You're supposed to be floating on air. Paige didn't answer. Bryn caught her eye in the mirror. Do you love him? Paige met her gaze. Are you seriously asking me that? Dead serious. They were both quiet for a moment. Yes, Paige said. I love him. Bryn looked back down at the dress. When did that even start happening? Paige gave a bitter little laugh. Back then, I didn't feel anything at all. And now? Now I feel plenty, and that's exactly the problem. Bryn didn't say anything. She just picked up the needle again. That evening, alone, Paige opened Owen's contact a few times. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she never worked up the nerve to hit it. Turnout at the registry office was small. Diane, her neighbor Aunt Cheryl, Bryn, Reed, and Tobin. Bennett didn't show. He'd texted that morning saying he had to be at an important business meeting. Paige's father was tied up in Calgary. He sent a short text with his congratulations and promised a proper celebration once he got back. Owen held Paige's hand while the officiant read through the required words. He glanced over at his mother once. Diane sat with a tissue in her hands, dabbing at her eyes over and over, trying not to fully break down. When it was over, Aunt Cheryl was the first to swoop in and hug the newlyweds. Tobin clapped Owen on the shoulder, and Bryn wrapped Paige in a tight hug, murmuring something in her ear. Paige waited for a lull, slipped over to the window, and quickly typed, "We're done. When's the money coming?" The reply came almost instantly. "It'll come. Give it a little time. A couple things still need sorting out." She frowned and typed, "What things?" "Tell you later. Don't ruin your big day." Paige stared at the screen a moment longer. Then she locked the phone, dropped it into her purse, and went back to join the others. The first few weeks of marriage went by surprisingly smoothly. They got used to each other through the small stuff. Owen quickly learned that waking Paige before 9 was only for emergencies. Paige noticed that after having tea, he always washed the cup right away, even if he was planning to pour another one 5 minutes later. Some evenings they cooked dinner together. Paige chopped vegetables, Owen fussed with the stove, the kitchen filled with the smell of frying onion, and the radio played quietly on the windowsill. One night they both reached for the TV remote at the same time and burst out laughing. Their life gradually took shape out of moments like that. Owen found himself hurrying home more and more. He used to linger after his shift, run errands on the way, chat with coworkers. Now he wanted to get to the apartment as fast as he could, where Paige would already be puttering around the kitchen or curled up on the couch with her laptop. Then small disagreements started to creep in. One Saturday, Owen got ready to head over to Diane's. He'd promised to help hang some new shelves. "You're going over there again?" Paige asked. Owen zipped up his jacket and looked at her. "She's my mom, Paige." "I know. I'll only be a couple hours." "Fine." He left. By the time he got back that evening, Paige had already cooled off, and they steered the conversation elsewhere without much trouble. A few days later, she stayed late after work herself, then again. Usually, she'd text that she'd swung by Bryn's and come home later than she'd said. At first, Owen didn't ask. She had her own life too, her own friends, her own things going on. But it kept happening, more and more. Sometimes she'd come home to find him already eating dinner alone. She'd shrug off her coat, toss her purse on a chair, and say, "Sorry, ran late." "It's fine." And Owen genuinely meant it when he said, "It's fine." Until, one day, he caught himself already having a rough sense of what time she'd walk in that night. Arthur asked Owen to look into an attempted breach of the plant's internal network. Someone had been trying to access the supply archive from outside. Owen spent several days tightening the security, checking login logs, and along the way went digging deeper into the old invoices. And that's when he finally saw the whole picture. The discrepancies kept repeating, roughly every 2 or 3 weeks. Same routes, similar amounts, the same intermediary paperwork. Each mistake looked minor on its own. Together, they added up to a pattern. Owen saved several files to his personal drive, the same one that already held the old log, and decided to keep this to himself for now. He wanted to figure out exactly what he'd found before saying anything. At home, he told Paige he'd been held up at work. She barely listened, just reminded him about the trip to the resort. That night, Owen woke up to the glow of a phone screen. Paige was sitting up beside him, reading something quickly. Then the screen went dark. He caught the name before it disappeared. Bennett. Owen didn't ask anything. He just turned toward the wall, though sleep took a long time to come. Bennett had been talking about the resort trip for weeks now. 200 kilometers out of town, fishing, a sauna, 2 days with the whole crowd. For them, trips like that were just what they did. The day before they left, Owen was packing when Paige stuck her head into the room. "You got everything?" "I think so." "Pack the warm jacket. It gets cold there at night." "Tobin said it'd be cold." Paige smiled. "Tobin's our survival expert now, is he?" "Looks that way." She went off to finish her own packing. Later that evening, Tobin came by to pick Owen up. While Owen loaded his bag into the trunk, Tobin stood next to him, hands in his jacket pockets, watching him double-check his things. He wanted to say something. He'd been running the conversation through his head the whole drive over. Give him a straight warning? Say the trip didn't sit right with him? But he didn't have any actual facts,
Just an uneasy feeling he couldn't even explain to himself.
"Got everything?" he finally asked. "I think so. Jacket, boots, flashlight. Toss the charger in, too." "Good." Owen shut the trunk and looked at him. "Why so quiet all of a sudden?" Tobin laughed it off. "Been a lot of work lately. Head's kind of scrambled." He wanted to add, "Keep your eyes open out there." He almost said it, then stopped himself. It would have come out strange, especially after all the talk about Owen being one of them now, and this just being a normal trip. "Let's go," Tobin said. "Let's go." Owen got in the car. Tobin started the engine and sat there a moment before pulling out. Before leaving, Owen had stopped by his mother's. Diane helped him check over his things and slipped a few sandwiches into his bag. "Mom, there'll be food there." "There will be. This is just for the road." He smiled and zipped up the bag. "Bennett going too?" she asked. "He's going." Diane just nodded. "What?" Owen asked. "Nothing."
Just asking. Owen laughed it off. 2 days, Mom. Fishing, sauna, and back.
"All right, just keep your phone on." "I will." Paige's packing took less time. She was already zipping up her bag when a message from Bennett came in. "We'll settle everything tomorrow. Don't even think about making a scene." She stared at the screen for a few seconds, then typed, "I'm not promising anything." Deleted it. Typed, "Leave Owen alone." Deleted that too. In the end, she just locked the phone and dropped it into her bag. An hour later, they were on the road out of town. Bennett's car led the way, with another one behind them. Paige watched the dark pines out the window and stayed quiet for most of the drive. Owen only noticed at their next stop. "You okay?" She turned to him. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" Paige was quiet for a moment. "About how sometimes things go too far before you notice." Owen didn't catch her meaning. He figured she was talking about her father.
"We'll figure it out," he said.
She nodded and turned back to the window. The lodge was called Tamarack Lodge. The group had been coming here for years. A handful of log cabins, a sauna, a fire pit, and a parking area by the gate. Cell service only worked near the main house, and even then it was hit or miss. Nobody minded, though. That was half the point of coming out here, getting away from the city. They traveled in 2 cars. Bennett, Reed, and 2 others in the first. Tobin, Bryn, Owen, and Paige in the second. Past the town of Northfield, the pavement ended. Plowed gravel took over after that, and eventually the road narrowed down to a single packed track between tall snowbanks. "Beautiful out here," Bryn said, looking out the window. "Even better in summer," Tobin said. "Summer out here is something else." Paige barely spoke. Owen took her hand. "What's wrong?" She flinched slightly and turned to him. "Nothing, just a bit of a headache." "Want a pill for it?" "No,
"It'll pass." She smiled, and Owen turned back to watch the road.
A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. Bennett's name lit up the screen. "Yeah?" Paige turned to the window, keeping her voice down. "How's our hero's mood?" Bennett asked. "Fine. What did you want?" "Nothing much. You guys close?" Maybe 40 minutes still. All right, see you soon. He hung up. Paige put the phone away. Owen glanced at her. Bennett? Yeah, asked how much longer we'd be. Right. The car went quiet again. White forest stretched past the windows, pine branches occasionally brushing snow off themselves, and sunlight flashed off the roadside so bright it made them squint. At the lodge, the sauna was already lit, and the smell of barbecue hung in the air. Jackets came off right at the door and landed on a bench. The first few hours were easy. Someone fussed over the grill, someone else hauled dishes out from the house, and the rest settled in around the fire. Owen gradually loosened up. Tobin told him stories from a previous trip, Reed argued with Bennett about fishing, and Bryn laughed loud enough that she kept having to remind herself to quiet down. Bennett kept topping up Owen's glass. Come on, Halvorsen, tonight you're allowed. I'm drinking plenty already. Then drink plenty and enjoy it. Paige sat next to him, touching his arm now and then when she spoke to him, doing her best to seem relaxed. Later, Owen headed to the cabin for his jacket. As evening set in, the cold had sharpened, and even by the fire it was starting to cut through their clothes. His jacket was on the bench among the others. He put it on, stuffed his hands in the pockets, and headed back to the fire. Paige watched him go. Bennett sat across from her, talking calmly with Reed, seeming to pay her no attention at all. A few minutes later, he got up, going to grab more firewood, and disappeared around the back of the house. Paige watched him go. A second later, her phone buzzed in her pocket again. Toward midnight, the mood of the fire began to shift, gradually. The conversations got shorter, the laughter less frequent. The fire was throwing less heat now, the wood burning down, and a sharp cold crept in from the trees. Come on, I want to show you something, Bennett said suddenly, standing up. Right over there, behind the sauna. Owen got up and followed him, leaving his jacket hanging on the back of the bench by the fire. It was only a few steps, and it was almost easier without it. Paige moved to follow, but Bryn caught her by the arm. Stay. Sit with me a minute. Bryn, Stay, Bryn said again, quieter, and Paige stayed. She watched Owen go, feeling the knot of dread inside her pull tighter. Bennett led Owen around behind the sauna building, where Reed and two others were already waiting. So, Halvorsen, Bennett said. Good night so far? It's fine. Dear listeners, let's take a short pause here. If this story's made you think or brought something of your own to mind, go ahead and hit that like button. That's how I know these stories are really reaching people. And tell me in the comments what city or country you're listening from. It means a lot to see people from every corner of the world gathering around one life story. Thank you for being here. Now, back to the story. Owen looked at him. Something unpleasant was already building inside him, his throat gone dry, even though a minute ago he'd still been sitting by the fire, drinking tea. Remember that school programming competition? Bennett asked, starting the way someone does when they're circling toward a point. And how Paige suddenly started paying attention to you? Just out of nowhere, right? Never once wondered why? Where's this going? $3 million, Bennett said, plainly. There was a bet. Whoever could get you to marry her inside 3 months. She agreed to it back in the winter. Owen said nothing. For a few seconds, he just looked at Bennett, trying to make what he'd just heard fit inside his head. What? You heard me, Bennett shrugged, no malice in it, like he was recapping something already settled long ago. Ask her yourself. Behind him, engines started turning over. Owen spun around. What's going on? He stepped toward the camp, but Reed and another guy moved to block his way. Nothing personal, Bennett said, already backing toward his car. You were a loser from the start. We just reminded you. Back at the fire, Paige sat listening to the engine start up. At first, she didn't think much of it. Figured they were just repositioning the cars closer to the cabins. "What about Owen?" she asked, standing. "We'll grab him later," someone from the group said, not looking at her. Paige frowned. "What do you mean, later? He's right there, behind the sauna." She looked around at the faces near her. Nobody was laughing. Bryn sat in silence. Reed was already walking toward the car. The others avoided her eyes. And then it hit her. "Are you serious right now?" She ran to Bennett's car and yanked at the door. "Stop the car! Stop it right now!" "Paige, sit down," Bennett said, calm, already pulling out. "Nothing's going to happen to him. Let him cool off a bit. Do some thinking." "Bennett, stop! Turn around and go back for him!" "Sit down," I said. She grabbed the door handle again. Locked. The car was already picking up speed on the narrow road. Paige twisted around and caught one last glimpse of the camp, the fire, Owen by the sauna. A few seconds later, the road curved and it all disappeared behind the trees. Owen came back to the fire for his jacket. It was still hanging on the bench. He put it on and reached into the pocket for his phone. The pocket was empty. No phone. Owen froze for a second. The first explanation that came to mind, it must have fallen out somewhere. But almost immediately he knew that wasn't right. The phone had been in his jacket the whole drive there. He checked the pockets of his pants. A crumpled bill and a bank card. Neither one was worth anything out here in the middle of the woods. Owen looked around the empty clearing. 2 pairs of headlights were already receding down the road, soon swallowed up between the trees. He was alone. He started walking down the only road there was, the same one they'd driven in on, hoping it would eventually lead him back to town. The cold sharpened with every hour that passed. By around 2, the wind had picked up, driving snow into his collar and down his back. He had to walk with his head down, one hand shielding his face. He tried to think about nothing but the road under his feet, but his mind kept dragging him back to the evening, to the gloves Bennett had handed him, to the laughter around the fire, to Bennett's flat, easy voice. "Ask her yourself." Those words left him colder than the wind ever could. Somewhere, far off, past the trees, some animal let out a long howl. The sound died away quickly, but Owen picked up his pace anyway. His legs slowly turned to lead. His breathing came ragged, his throat raw, his lips almost past feeling the cold. At some point he lost his footing on a frozen rut and went down hard on his knees. Snow packed instantly into his gloves. Owen sat there for a few seconds, breathing hard, then pushed himself up and kept walking. He'd lost track of how much time had passed, an hour, maybe more, when the road split ahead of him. Owen stopped, trying to remember which branch they'd driven in on. In the dark, both turns looked identical now. He picked the wider road and kept going. Up ahead, off to the left, something dark flickered between the trees. A low, squat shape, too regular to be a tree. Owen cut toward it, sinking to his knees in unbroken snow where there was no packed trail. It turned out to be an old log cabin, a hunting shack by the looks of it. The door hung crooked, and one window had been broken out and stuffed with rags. He wrenched the door open, stepped inside, and pulled it shut behind him. A wide gap remained along the bottom, letting in a steady draft of cold. Inside it smelled of damp wood, old ash, and dust. A rusted wood stove stood in the corner. A small stack of split firewood lay against the wall, coated in dust and cobwebs. On a narrow shelf beside the stove, Owen spotted a box of matches. Someone had clearly left them there on purpose, for anyone who might end up stranded in weather like this. Owen sat down next to the stove. He was still shaking badly. He clenched and unclenched his fingers a few times, trying to get feeling back into them, then picked up the matches. The first one snapped. The second flared and went out immediately. He swore under his breath, dragged his hands over his face, and picked up the box again. He found an old newspaper on the floor. Owen tore it into strips, packed them under the wood, and struck another match. On the 8th or 9th try, the paper finally caught. A thin yellow flame at first, then the fire spread to the kindling. He fed it piece by piece, cupping a hand around the flame to block the draft, until it was strong enough to take the first split log. There wasn't much heat. The stove barely warmed at all, and the smoke went half up the chimney and half stayed in the cabin, stinging his eyes. But after the cold outside, even this pitiful fire felt like salvation. He sat with his hands stretched toward the stove, feeling his fingers slowly thaw. First came the pain, then the pins and needles. After a while, his eyelids grew heavy. He didn't notice himself drifting off, slumped against the wall. He woke to the growl of an engine. The sound came from far off, a heavy motor drawing closer, then fading, as if the vehicle had passed along some neighboring road. Owen scrambled up. "Hey!" He threw the door open and ran outside. "Over here! Hey!" His voice cracked and vanished into the wind. Owen strained to listen. The growl faded further and further away. He stood in the doorway a few more seconds, staring into the dark. Before he understood, the truck was already gone. He walked slowly back into the cabin and shut the door. Nothing left to do now but wait for morning. He went back to the stove, fed it more wood, and sat like that until the gray light of pre-dawn, dropping in and out of short, restless dozes, waking each time to the cold. By morning, the fire had almost burned down, and damp crept back in through the walls. When the light outside began to gray, he went out. He couldn't sit inside four walls any longer. The road he'd walked in the dark turned out to be close by, barely 50 meters from the cabin. Owen found it again and kept walking. At least now he could see where he was putting his feet. About 40 minutes later, an engine sounded up ahead, the heavy, steady drone of a truck shuttling crews between logging sites. A truck with a boxed-in cargo bed came around the bend, the kind used to move work crews between remote points on the plant's grounds. Owen stepped onto the road and raised his hand. The truck rolled a few more meters, then braked and reversed back toward him. A man in his 40s climbed out of the cab, dressed in work coveralls. "What are you doing out here?" He looked Owen up and down. "You're frozen solid. Get in the cab." "Got lost," Owen said, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, I can see that. Come on, get in." The cab was so warm that at first it was almost hard to breathe. His fingers still shook, and he had to hold the mug of hot tea with both hands. "I'll drop you at the remote work camp," the driver said, pulling away. "They've got a first aid station there. Get you warmed up, then we'll figure out how to get you into town." At the first aid station, they gave him more tea, wrapped him in a blanket, and had him lie down. The paramedic checked his hands and listened to his breathing. "No serious frostbite, but you sure gave yourself a night out there. Just rest for now." About an hour later, Owen could hold a phone steady enough to use it. They lent him a work phone. He called Paige. She answered almost instantly. "Owen? God, where are you? I've been up all night." "Why'd you do it?" She went silent. "Owen, I didn't know they were going to—" "Why'd you do this?" "I didn't do anything. He closed his eyes. His body still ached from the cold, felt weighed down. And Paige's voice suddenly sounded like it was coming from very far away. "I get it now." "Owen, please, let me explain." He didn't answer, just ended the call. The screen showed his recent calls. Owen looked at it for a few seconds, deleted Paige's number, and handed the phone back to the paramedic. Outside, an ordinary day was getting underway at the remote work camp. Low work cabins, smoke rising from chimneys, people in work clothes, someone hauling a bucket across the yard. Owen turned away from the window and closed his eyes. He didn't make it back to the city until the evening of the following day. The paramedic had insisted he rest a few more hours. Then came a ride to the highway, and after that, a scheduled bus that dragged on for nearly 3 hours, stopping in every small town along the way. He didn't go straight home. He got off at the bus station and walked, even though his legs ached and all he wanted was to lie down on a bench somewhere and close his eyes. For a few hours, he wandered the city without any real destination, cutting through familiar courtyards, coming back out onto the street. He needed a little more time before he could walk through his own front door. His mother opened the door before he'd even gotten his key out. "Owen, God, you're white as a sheet. What happened?"
"Nothing," he said, stepping inside. "Just got cold. Car broke down, had to walk to the highway."
"Walk? From where?"
"It's a long story, Mom. I'm really tired."
Diane studied him closely, but didn't push for more. She brought him a blanket, put a cup of tea in front of him, and pressed her palm to his forehead once more. "Drink. It's hot." He drank it and went straight to bed. By morning, his fever had spiked, nearly 40. He shook so hard his teeth chattered, even under 2 blankets. "I'm calling an ambulance," Diane said. "Don't, Mom. I just need to rest it off." "Owen, really, I'll rest it off." She didn't argue. She sat with him all day, swapping out the cold cloth on his forehead, bringing water, pulling the blanket back up whenever it slipped. 3 days later, his fever finally broke. 2 days after that, Owen could sit up at the kitchen table, though he still tired quickly and kept himself wrapped in a warm sweater. On one of those days, the doorbell rang. Diane went to answer it and came back a moment later with some bags in her hands. "That was Tessa." Owen looked up. "Brought groceries and some kind of medicine. Asked if she could come in." He was quiet for a moment. "Tell her not to." "Owen." "Mom, I don't want to see anyone." Diane looked at him, then went back to the front hall without a word. A minute later, she came back alone. She set the bags on the table. She said she wouldn't come in, just left this and went. Owen looked at the bags. Oranges, cough syrup, some medication, and a few groceries. He didn't say anything. Only after a few seconds did he ask, how long had she been waiting? 10 minutes, maybe? Owen nodded and looked at the bags again. Right. The group gathered at Bennett's 2 days after everyone got back, without Owen, obviously. They sat around the same table where they'd planned the trip not long before, talking about it now as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Bennett poured drinks. "Well," he said, "I'd say that all went fine." "Fine?" Bryn set her glass down on the table. "You left a man out in the woods." "We didn't leave him. He knew where the road was." "At -25. He's fine, I checked." "He's fine now because someone found him." Bennett shrugged. "And they did find him." Bryn stared at him for a few seconds. "Do you even understand what could have happened?" "Bryn, come on, enough." "No, not enough." She got up from the table and grabbed her jacket. "I thought you just wanted to teach him a lesson. You've completely lost it." "So what was I supposed to do?" Bennett was starting to get irritated. "Hand him a medal for making it into our crowd?" Bryn didn't answer. She just grabbed her bag and walked out. In the hallway, she ran into Tobin, who was already putting his coat on too. "You're leaving too?" "Yeah." Tobin zipped up his jacket and paused a second at the door. "I wanted to warn him before the trip." Bryn looked at him. "Why didn't you?" Tobin looked away. "Honestly, don't know." "You know." He was quiet for a moment. "Guess I chickened out." Bryn nodded. I should have done something sooner, too. They left together, then split off in different directions once they hit the street. Reed stayed behind. He barely followed the rest of the conversation. Bryn's words about the woods kept circling in his head, along with the way Bennett had brushed the whole thing off. The next day, Reed was walking past Grant Sorensen's office, Bennett's father. The door was cracked open, and he caught part of a conversation without meaning to. "I told you, no more improvising," Grant was saying, clearly annoyed. "We had people combing hospitals for him afterward." A few seconds of silence. Did they manage to pull anything off the phone? Reed couldn't make out the answer. He was about to keep walking when he caught, "I need those specific files. You can delete the rest."
Reed froze for a second, then kept moving, careful not to speed up his pace. He had no idea what Grant had been talking about, but after the trip to Tamarack Lodge, that phrase wouldn't leave his head. The doorbell rang toward evening. Diane went to answer it and came back into the room a minute later. "Bennett's here. And Paige." Owen got up off the couch. Tell them yourself," his mother cut in. "I'll be in the kitchen." She went out to the entryway first. Owen heard her clipped, "Come in." Bennett stepped in first. Paige followed behind him, eyes on the floor, barely looking up. Owen came out to meet them. "I wanted to talk," Bennett said. "What do you want?" Bennett pulled an envelope out of his pocket and set it on the side table. "There's $150,000 in there. I know it doesn't fix anything. Just take it." Owen looked at the envelope. "Take it back." "Owen, listen. Take it back, I said." Bennett looked at him for a few seconds, then nodded. "Fine." He put his hand on the door handle. "Paige, I'll wait in the car." She didn't say anything. Bennett left. Owen turned to her. "Why?" Paige looked up. "It started as a bet. Bennett offered money to whoever could get you to marry her. I said yes." "For the money?" "For the money," she repeated. "Yes." Owen was quiet for a moment. "And after that?" She swallowed. "After that, everything changed." "When?" "I don't know exactly. It happened slowly. At first, I genuinely didn't care one way or the other. Then I started waiting for your texts, wanting to see you. And at some point, I realized I wasn't playing a part anymore." Owen looked away. "Did you know what they were planning to do at the lodge?" "I knew something was supposed to happen after the wedding. Bennett kept talking about some kind of prank. I never thought they'd leave you out there alone." "When did you realize?" "When the cars started pulling away." She spoke quietly, barely lifting her eyes. "I tried to stop Bennett, but he'd already made up his mind." Owen looked at her for a few seconds. "That doesn't make this any easier for me." "I know. I don't trust you anymore." Paige nodded. "I understand." Owen pointed at the door. "Go." Bennett silently reached for the handle. Paige lingered a second, like she wanted to say something more, but only looked at Owen and followed him out. Diane shut the door and turned the lock. The envelope stayed on the side table. Owen walked past it into the other room without even glancing at it. Diane didn't touch it either. She just switched off the light in the entryway. The divorce went through fast. A few signatures, a few minutes waiting in the hallway at City Hall. Paige slid the ring off her finger and turned it over in her hands. "Do you want it back?" "No." She dropped it into her bag. At the counter, she said quietly, "I understand you're never going to forgive me." Owen didn't answer. He signed his line, took his copy of the certificate, and walked out without waiting for her to finish with the paperwork. At home, over dinner, Diane asked, "So?" "It's done." She looked at him. "How are you doing?" "Fine."
Diane was quiet for a moment, then set down her fork. I worry about you. Mom, I'm fine. I can see that. I'm just afraid you're going to bottle all this up again. Owen looked at her and wanted to say something, but couldn't find the right words. I'll manage, he said finally. Diane nodded. I know you will. In the server room, Frank walked in with some papers and laid them on the desk in front of Owen. Look at this. The cable invoice is off again. Second time this month. I'll look into it. Not blaming you, just letting you know. Owen nodded without looking away from the screen. Frank stood there a moment, then left. The next morning, a thermos sat on Owen's desk. No note. Owen unscrewed the cap, poured himself some tea, and paused for a second, then said quietly, Thanks. Even though Frank was already long gone, after the divorce, Owen just went quieter. At work, he stuck to what was necessary and went straight home after every shift. Tessa texted him a few times, asking how he was, offering to help. He read the messages, but didn't feel like answering. One day, he saw her by the gate. Hey, Tessa said. Hey, how are you? Owen shrugged. Fine. She wanted to say something else, but he'd already checked his watch. I've got to go. Okay. A few steps later, he heard behind him, Take care of yourself. Owen didn't turn around. That evening, at home, he opened their old thread without really meaning to. Tessa's last message was 3 days old. If you ever need anything, just text me. He read it again and put the phone away. The equipment failure at the remote hub happened Friday evening, right as Owen was wrapping up his shift. Frank showed up in the server room just before it ended. Connection's down at Site 7. The whole sector's blind. Someone needs to go now. Weather's turning. By morning, it'll be completely snowed in. Owen checked the time. His shift was practically over already, but there was no point arguing. If the site stayed offline all night, the morning would bring a far bigger mess to sort out. All right, I'll go. The drive took over an hour. Ordinary snow at first, then it thickened, grew heavier, started clinging to the windshield. The headlights caught only a few meters of road before everything dissolved into white. The wipers swept back and forth almost without stopping. The engine ran steady, but the cab grew quieter and quieter. Owen even turned off the radio once he noticed himself straining to catch every sound the car made. Halfway there, the engine suddenly sputtered and died. Owen tried the ignition again. The starter turned over, but the engine wouldn't catch. He sat there for a few seconds without opening the door. Outside, the snow whipped past almost horizontal, slamming into the car and sweeping off the hood in the same instant. That white noise made it far too easy to remember another night, another road, and the exact moment he'd realized he was alone. His throat went dry. Owen gripped the wheel, took a few deep breaths, and made himself look at the dashboard. Easy, he said out loud. Just a car, just stalled. He got out. The cold hit his face instantly. By the time he had the hood up, snow had already worked its way down his collar, his fingers going numb fast. He checked the wiring, tested the connections, found a connector that had come loose, and reseated it. The job took a few minutes, but by the end, his hands had gone so stiff he needed both of them just to hold the key. Owen climbed back in, shut the door, and sat a while, warming his fingers by the heater vent. Then he turned the key. The engine caught on the second try. He sat a little longer, listening to it idle steadily. Only then did he pull out. He reached the site almost an hour behind schedule. While sorting out the connection failure, Owen decided to check the access log for the local equipment as well. The system was working, but the older entries loaded slowly, one after another. That's when he noticed the date. A month earlier, someone had remotely connected to this hub. The time, duration of the connection, technical ID, all of it was logged. Except there'd been no scheduled maintenance that day. Owen went back over the entry, then checked an adjacent log. Same thing. He frowned, pulled out a notebook, and wrote down the date, time, and node number. He didn't try to work it out right then. First, he needed to understand exactly what he'd found, and that meant getting into other logs. On the drive back, the entry kept coming back to him. A random technical glitch? Someone else's access? Or had someone actually gone somewhere they weren't supposed to? No answers yet. Owen didn't get to bed until well past midnight. The apartment was quiet, just the fridge clicking on now and then in the kitchen, and the pipes in the wall ticking softly with the heat. He lay in the dark, scrolling through his phone without much interest. News, the work chat, a few unread messages. His thumb stopped on Tessa's contact. He opened the thread, looked at her last message, closed it again. A few seconds later, he opened her contact. Meant to call. Tapped it. The screen showed the start of a ring before Owen realized what he'd actually done and hung up. For God's sake, he muttered to himself. He set the phone down beside the pillow. A couple minutes later, the screen lit up. Did you just call? Owen picked the phone back up. He looked at the message for a few seconds, then wrote, Yeah, meant to call. Guess it's kind of late. The reply came fairly fast. Let's do tomorrow. I'm at a restaurant with a friend right now. He read the last sentence again, then once more. He couldn't have said exactly why those two words caught him. Tessa could be sitting there with anyone, a coworker, an acquaintance, a friend. She didn't owe him any explanation at all. Owen turned the phone screen down, lay there like that for a minute, then flipped it back over. No new messages. He laughed at himself, not entirely sure why, and set the phone on the nightstand. Sleep took a while to come. Sunday, he sat down at the computer anyway. Not for work, just because he couldn't settle at home. Light snow fell outside all morning, the occasional big flake ticking against the glass. He pulled up the drive where he'd been copying anything suspicious out of the supply archive over the past year, and started going through the files again, more carefully this time, cross-referencing dates. A pile of notes slowly grew on the desk. Owen wrote down everything he'd noticed over the past year. The first mismatch in the reports, the visit from the man with the badge who'd never properly introduced himself, the odd questions about access Reed had asked him once, and now this remote login at Site 7. Then he pulled out his phone and checked the dates of his get-togethers with Paige over the winter. One matched the date the system had flagged a login to his account, in the evening. At the time, he'd written it off as a technical glitch. Owen checked the date again. It matched. He leaned back in his chair and dragged a hand down his face. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the computer tower under the desk. Any one of these facts, on its own, could be explained away as coincidence. Together, they added up to something else. He thought about the lodge, about his phone disappearing out of his jacket. Owen picked up his phone, found Reed's number, and typed, "Hey, we need to talk. Found some stuff about the plant. Have some questions." The reply came almost right away. Tomorrow. Not on plant grounds, though. They met at a cafe out on the edge of town, well away from downtown, somewhere the odds of running into anyone they knew were about as low as they could get. Reed got there first. He sat at a corner table, turning a cup of coffee in his hands that had long since stopped steaming. "What do you want to talk about?" he asked, once Owen sat down across from him. "My phone, at the lodge." Reed was quiet, then nodded. "Bennett told me to grab it, said he'd explain later." "And you just took it?" "Yeah." "You didn't ask why?" "I did." Reed looked away. "He said he wanted to see what was on there. Texts, photos, whatever. I figured it was nothing, jealousy maybe, something to do with Paige." Didn't think it was anything more serious than that. What's more serious?
He'd asked me before, Reed said slowly, like he was running old conversations back through his head as he spoke. Not about the phone. Something else. What access you had at the plant. What systems you could get into. Whether you worked with the supply archive. I figured he was just curious. You were always around them by that point. Paige right there with you. I didn't think anything of it. Why would he want the supply archive? I don't know, Reed said honestly. I really don't. He never told me the whole picture. I just did what he asked. And who looked through my phone? Not me. I handed it off once we were already on the road, to Bennett in the car. Owen sat there, staring at his untouched cup. The coffee had gone cold a long time ago. All right, he said finally. Thanks for at least telling me that much. Reed nodded. Doesn't fix everything, I know. No, it doesn't, Owen agreed. He stood, left money on the table for coffee he'd never touched, and walked out. Owen set up the meeting himself, called the front office and asked for 10 minutes without explaining why. Arthur saw him that same day, that evening, once the office had emptied out. Go ahead, he said, setting his papers aside. Owen laid printouts across the desk, dates, invoices, the paper trail he'd been piecing together for over 6 months. This is the export shipments, he said. The numbers keep coming up wrong, same route, over and over. And the timing lines up with when Grant's logistics team is running things. Arthur put on his glasses and started flipping through the papers. He skimmed a few pages quickly, then stopped, flipped back, and reread one of the tables. This shell company, he said, tapping a finger on the document, shows up 3 times here in 6 months. Did you check who's behind it? Tried. Officially, it's all clean. Nominal director, ordinary shell setup. Right. Arthur took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. How many instances like this have you found? 8, maybe more. I haven't finished checking every route yet. Arthur leaned back in his chair. Who else knows about this? Nobody. Reed knows part of it, not all of it. The office went quiet for a few seconds. Outside, it was already getting dark. The desk lamp reflected in the window glass. All right, Arthur said. Don't say a word about this to anyone for now. Especially not Grant. Not directly, not through anyone else. Understood. Make another copy of everything you found. Keep it separate from your work computer. Hang on to the original documents for now. Owen nodded. What do I do in the meantime? Just wait? Work like normal. If you start getting calls, strange questions, or anyone tries to reach you through your mother, call me immediately. Owen frowned. Through my mother? Just in case. Arthur picked the papers back up. If they realize you're the one who found this, they might try to apply pressure. So don't go digging on your own, and don't show this to anyone else. Talk to me about it, and only me. Understood. I'll bring in the lawyers. First, we figure out exactly what's happening here. Then we decide what to do about it. Owen nodded, gathered his papers, and left. The hallway was empty. He glanced at his watch out of habit, and only then realized he'd been in Arthur's office for almost an hour. Things were tense at the Langford house those days. That evening, Tessa noticed her father had stayed late in his study again. When he finally came out, she was waiting in the living room. Dad, what's going on? Arthur was quiet. Owen found something at the plant. Looks like money's been getting siphoned out through shell companies for a while now. Tessa frowned. And this is causing problems? Already has. One of our major partners has paused negotiations. The lawyers are working through it. And Owen? He brought everything to me, himself. That was where the conversation ended.
But Tessa sat in the kitchen a long while after, staring at her cold tea. Later, she called Owen anyway. "Hey." "Hey." "My dad told me about the plant." Owen was quiet. "How bad is it?" "I still don't know. I've only just started digging." Tessa let out a breath. "That explains why he hasn't seemed like himself the last few days. I never wanted this to spiral like this. You did the right thing." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm just scared for him." "I understand," Owen said. "I hope it can still get sorted out." The call came late that evening, just as Owen was about to go to bed. Wet snow whispered against the window, the fridge humming quietly in the kitchen. The number was unfamiliar. He answered, expecting something work-related. "Halvorsen?" The voice was male, calm, no anger in it. "Heard you've been poking around in other people's business." Owen sat down on the edge of the bed. "Who is this?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is you'd be smarter sticking to your own job and staying out of things that don't concern you. Your mother's sick, isn't she? Lives close by, too. Things happen." Owen's mouth went dry. "Is that a threat?" "I'm just telling you what tends to happen when someone sticks their nose where it doesn't belong." The line went dead. Owen held the phone to his ear a few seconds longer, then slowly lowered his hand. His chest was pounding unpleasantly, his palms damp. He walked into the kitchen. Light from the hallway fell across the table where Diane had left a half-finished cup of tea. From her room came the steady sound of her breathing. Owen checked the front door, tried the lock, then looked in on his mother, asleep. He stood in her doorway a few seconds longer before going back to his own room. In the morning, he called Arthur and told him about the call. "Do you still have the number?" Arthur asked right away. "Yeah, unknown, no name attached." "Do you remember the conversation word for word?" "Pretty close." "Write it down right now, while it's fresh, every word you can remember." "Any other calls since?" "No, just the one." "Does anyone besides me know about the material?" "No." "Good." There was no panic in Arthur's voice, just focus. "From now on, don't say anything on calls like that beyond hello. Don't promise anything, don't confirm anything. Keep every number and message, screenshot everything just in case. If they call again or try to get to you through your mother, call me immediately, anytime." "I want to hand the material over officially," Owen said. "So it's all on the record and someone else handles it from here." Arthur was quiet for a moment. "Agreed, but not today, not tomorrow. First, we bring in corporate security and the lawyers. We do this properly, so the handover itself doesn't come back on you later. Give me a few days." "All right." "One more thing," Arthur added before hanging up. "Given that they actually called you, someone up the chain already knows you're digging into this. Which means Grant might not be the one who came up with all this. He might just be carrying it out." Owen was quiet. "Understood." Owen set the phone down and sat in silence a while longer, then looked at the printouts and slid them back into the folder. He ran into Paige by chance at the grocery store. He spotted her at the far end of the aisle just as she was about to leave. "Hey," she said, stopping. "Hey." For a few seconds, they just stood there, facing each other. "Heard about Grant?" "Yeah, probably the whole town's heard by now." She smiled. "How are you doing now?" "Fine, working." Paige looked down. "I know it's probably too late for me to try explaining anything to you. And I don't have an excuse, I know that." Owen didn't say anything. "I tried to give the money back to Bennett," she went on. "After everything. He wouldn't take it. Said it was my problem now." She went quiet, then added softly, "Sometimes I wonder,
If that bet had never happened, maybe things would have turned out differently. Owen looked at her. Paige, what happened, happened. I know. And I also know that between us, at some point, it was real. She looked up. Really? Really. I felt it. Paige nodded quickly, trying to smile. But you understand it yourself, Owen said. After everything that happened, there's no going back to that. I understand. He was quiet for a moment. I don't hate you. It's just, after all this, I won't be able to trust you again. Yeah. I hope things go well for you. She nodded. Take care of yourself, Owen. You too. He ran into Tessa outside the plant. She was picking up some old equipment photos from Frank for her archive, just as Owen was coming off shift. Oh, perfect timing, she said. Help me carry these. There's 2 boxes. Sure. They walked to her car together. On the way, Tessa told him about how Frank had nearly handed her an old fan for the collection. A man in a nice coat was already standing by her car, holding 2 cups of coffee. Here, he said to Tessa. Figured you'd be freezing by now. Thanks. She took the cup and turned to Owen. This is Jessie. Jessie, Owen. Good to meet you, Jessie said. Likewise. Jessie looked at Tessa. I'll swing by tonight then, around 8? Sure, just remind me about the photos. Will do. He smiled at her, gave Owen a short nod, and headed to his own car. Owen set the second box in the trunk. Known each other long? Tessa looked at him. A few months. Ah. What? Nothing. She smiled slightly. Right. Owen shut the trunk. All right, I should get going. Thanks for the help. Don't mention it. She got in her car, waved, and drove off. Owen stayed in the parking lot, watching her car until it turned the corner. Then he shoved his hands in his pockets and walked home. The exhibit opened at the Red Cedar Cultural Center at the end of the month. A small room, a couple dozen photos of the city's old buildings hung along pale walls. Cold drifted in from the entrance every time the door opened, along with damp snow and the smell of wet jackets. Inside, it smelled of coffee from a small refreshment table and fresh paint. Owen came by after work. Tessa spotted him almost right away and broke off from a small knot of guests. What are you doing here? Was in the neighborhood. She looked at him, smiling. Sure you were. The plant's the other way entirely. Got lost. Tessa snorted. Come on, I'll show you a couple. Since you managed to get lost here, of all places. She led him along the wall. Music played quietly in the room. Guests murmured to each other. A cup clinked somewhere. Owen stopped in front of one photo. An old house with a sagging porch, peeling window frames, snow on the roof. This one's good. That one? Tessa made a face. That's honestly the weakest one in the whole series. The light's terrible. I like it, though. Then you have bad taste. I know computers, not photography, he said. Maybe that's why I like it. There's just something about it. Tessa laughed and nudged him with her elbow. Fine, come on. I'll show you an actually good one, since you clearly don't know what you're talking about. They moved on. Across the room, Owen spotted Jessie. He came over, said a brief hello, and stopped in front of one of the pieces. The light fell well here, he told Tessa. Told you the close-up would pull its weight. You did, she agreed. Thanks again for the help hanging everything. Any time. Jessie smiled at her, held her gaze a beat longer, then nodded to both of them. I'll go say hi to the curator. She's been eyeing me from across the room. He stepped off toward another group of guests. Tessa watched him go, then turned back to Owen. So, about your terrible taste. Sticking with that photo or admitting defeat? Sticking with it. Stubborn. A little. She laughed again. Owen smiled too. He felt easy here,
surrounded by other people's conversations, the smell of coffee, the photographs on the walls. It had been a while since he'd seen Tessa like this, absorbed in her own thing, animated, completely alive. They kept walking. Tessa told him about the next photo, occasionally stopping to point out some detail he never would have noticed on his own. A few minutes later, Owen caught sight of Jesse out of the corner of his eye. He was standing by the far wall, talking to one of the guests. At one point, he glanced their way, held it a second, then turned back to whoever he was talking to. Owen didn't say anything. He just found himself listening to Tessa a little more closely than before. A month after the threatening phone call, Arthur called him in again, this time to the boardroom. A man he didn't recognize was already sitting there, in a sharp suit, a thin folder in front of him. He introduced himself as an investigator from corporate security. "We've finished the preliminary review," he said, opening the folder. "The scheme was real. The shell company you found was undervaluing part of the export shipments. The difference moved through 2 more companies overseas." Owen listened, hands clasped on the table. "And Grant?" Technically, he wasn't the only one signing off on the paperwork, but his department controlled the routes. Legal's assessment is that he didn't originate the scheme. That said, he clearly knew what was happening, and he was taking his share. So, who did originate it? The man closed the folder. "That's for us to handle from here. Law enforcement may get involved. Your part in this is done." After he left, Arthur poured himself some water. The boardroom was quiet, just the hum of the ventilation somewhere behind the wall. "Grant's being pulled from logistics as of tomorrow," he said. "Officially pending review. For him, that's probably the end of his career here." "What about the contracts?" Arthur took a sip of water. "2 partners have already dropped out of negotiations. We're working to hold on to 3 others. We're explaining that we launched the review ourselves the moment we found the problem." Owen nodded. "Did it hit hard?" "Hard. But the plant will survive it." They were both quiet for a few seconds. Owen felt the exhaustion settle into every part of him. He just wanted to stand up, walk outside, and not talk to anyone for a few hours. Arthur looked at him. "Thank you for seeing this through. A lot of people would have looked the other way." Owen shrugged. "Couldn't have done that." He stood up from the table. The first weeks after everything settled passed in an unfamiliar kind of quiet. Owen went to work, handled whatever needed handling, sometimes stayed late. Alongside all that, he'd started a small side business of his own. Arthur had connected him with 2 local companies even before the whole mess started, and now Owen helped them out occasionally with their networks and equipment. In the evenings, he came home, put the kettle on, ate dinner alone. Sometimes after dinner, he'd just sit by the window with a cup of tea, listening to cars hiss past on the wet asphalt outside. There used to always be something urgent at that hour, a call, a problem, some document that needed checking. Now his phone could sit on the table for hours without making a sound. At first, that even irritated him. Then he got used to it. One weekend, Reed called. "You free?" "I think so." "Let's hit the rink. Remember where everybody used to go?" "I remember." The ice was nearly empty. Snow crunched underfoot, quiet music drifting from the speakers at the rental counter. Reed nearly wiped out a few times, swore, then laughed at himself. An hour in, they sat down on a bench to catch their breath. "Feels strange here now," Reed said, looking out at the almost empty ice. "Bennett left town right after the investigation started. Nobody's seen him around since. Bryn's in a different city. Tobin's talking about leaving too. What about you?" "I'm still here," he shrugged. "Barely talk to my dad these days. Probably easier that way, honestly." Owen nodded. For a while, they just watched the ice. No old crowd, no drinks, no talk of who owed who what. Just sitting together. That evening, Owen went to see his mother. The hallway smelled of frying onion. She was cooking something in the kitchen. He took off his jacket, hung it up, and pulled out his phone. His last message to Tessa was a week old. Snowing again today. Spring's just refusing to show up. He'd answered back then. Agreed. I could really use some warmth already. And that was it.
Owen scrolled up through the thread, lingered on a few old messages, then locked the screen. A minute later, he unlocked it again, typed, "How's the exhibit going?" Looked at it, deleted it. Set the phone's screen down and went to the kitchen. "Mom, dinner ready?" "Almost. Go wash your hands first." "On it." Owen smiled and went to the sink. Thursday evening, Owen opened his thread with Tessa a few times before finally typing, "You free tomorrow evening?" The reply came about 20 minutes later. "Why?" Owen was lying on the couch, having already flipped his phone screen down and back a couple of times. "Wanted to grab coffee." "You don't even like coffee." He smiled. "Tea, then." The pause that time was shorter. "Fine. I know a place with decent tea and nobody we know." They met at the Hearth Cafe. Cold rain drizzled outside, the occasional car hissing past on the wet road. Inside, it smelled of pastry and cinnamon, dishes clinking somewhere behind the counter. A handful of tables, bookshelves lining the walls, warm yellow light. The owner spotted Tessa and greeted her by name with a smile. "You come here a lot?" Owen asked, sitting down. "Sometimes, when I want somewhere nobody bothers me." The conversation came easy. Her exhibit, his new clients, the fact that neither of them, it turned out, could stand strong tea, even though that's exactly what they'd both ordered. At some point, Tessa glanced at his hands. "Your hands can't sit still. Do you fidget like this in interviews, too?" Owen laughed. "I don't do interviews. I'm my own boss." "So why are you nervous?" "I'm not nervous." "That's the third time you've moved that cup." He looked down at the cup. It really had migrated almost to the edge of the table. "Fine, a little." "Better," she said. After that, it got easier. He told her how Frank still somehow found ways to show up at the plant and finish his work for him, even after retiring. Tessa told him about the cafe owner who used to teach half the town how to paint. Outside, the rain turned to wet snow. Every so often, someone came in, shook the water off their hood, pulled the door shut behind them, and for a few seconds, the room filled with cold air. "Hey," Owen said, "did you actually think I'd just happened to wander into your exhibit?" Tessa smiled. "No, but I liked pretending I believed it." He smiled too. He couldn't quite manage an answer right away. His throat had gone dry, so he took a sip of his tea, gone cold by now. The evening ended faster than either of them expected. The owner started clearing the neighboring tables, glancing at the clock more than once. At the door, Owen zipped up his jacket and looked at Tessa. "Thanks for tonight." "Thank you, for the tea neither of us actually likes." He smiled. "Do it again sometime?" Tessa held his gaze a second. "I'd like that." She asked him to help her sort through her old photo archive, thousands of unlabeled files piled up on an external drive with no order to any of it. At one point, Tessa seriously threatened to delete the whole thing out of pure frustration. "You actually shot all of this?" Owen was scrolling through folders named things like New Folder 12. "I shot faster than I sorted. That's normal." "This is chaos. This is creative disorder." Creative disorder usually has some kind of system to it. She threw a couch cushion at him. Owen caught it and immediately took another one to the shoulder. "Now that's definitely a system," he said. "Very funny." They spent the next 2 hours at the computer, sorting photos by year, arguing over which period a series shot somewhere between winter and spring belonged to. The computer hummed quietly in the room. Cars passed by outside now and then.
and gradually the folders on the screen stopped being the main point of the evening. At some point, Tessa was telling him another story, and Owen realized he couldn't even remember which file they'd last had open. Later, he walked her home. It was bitterly cold, snow crunching underfoot, their breath coming out in white clouds. Tessa was in the middle of telling him, animated, about another old house slated for demolition, waving her hands as she talked. "And can you believe it? The ceiling molding's still intact. Nobody even thought to—" "Tessa?" She stopped. "What?" Owen looked at her. His mind went strangely blank. "Nothing." She smirked. "Nothing again? That's two for the night." He leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was brief and a little clumsy. Tessa went still for a second, but didn't pull away. When Owen finally stepped back first, she looked at him, surprised, and a small smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. "Well, now I know what you meant to say," Tessa said. Owen laughed. "I guess so." She looked down and adjusted her scarf. "I should go early morning tomorrow." "Of course." Tessa opened the door to her building, then turned back. "So, see you?" "See you." She disappeared inside. Owen stood out in the cold a while longer. His cheeks had already started to sting, but he wasn't in any hurry to leave. He woke the next morning before his alarm and reached for his phone first thing. No new messages, just the usual work chats. He set the phone back down, then almost immediately picked it up again. Tessa didn't text until around noon. Found 2 more old hard drives, a few thousand more photos in there, honestly scared to even open the folder. "Want to help me deal with it?" "I do," he answered almost instantly. That evening, he went over. Her apartment smelled of freshly brewed tea and the dust off old boxes. Envelopes of negatives already covered the table, along with a few enlarged prints and a small lamp Tessa had set up right over them. The conversation flowed easily from the start. Whatever awkwardness there'd been the night before was already gone. "Did you really stand outside your place for a while last night, after I left?" she asked, sorting through photos. 5 minutes, maybe? What were you thinking about?" "That I forgot to say goodnight." She looked at him and snorted. "Seriously?" "Seriously. Stood there thinking about exactly that." "You're ridiculous." Owen smiled too. Later they went for a walk. Tessa wanted to show him a courtyard nearby that she was planning to photograph. It had gotten noticeably colder outside, the half-frozen snow crunching underfoot. They walked side by side, talking about light, old houses, and how early it was starting to get dark now. At some point, Owen took her hand. Tessa glanced down at their hands, smiled slightly, and squeezed his fingers back. "By the way," she said, "last night you said nothing twice before you finally found a way to actually say something. That's called building up courage gradually. Took a while to build up. Worth it, though." She laughed and bumped his shoulder with hers. They stopped outside her building. "So, see you tomorrow?" Owen asked. "Tomorrow." She smiled and climbed the steps. Owen waited until the door closed behind her before heading to his car. A few days later, they were back at her place, going through material for a new exhibit. Photos, catalogs, and sheets of frame measurements covered the table. Tessa's phone buzzed briefly. She glanced at the screen, typed a quick reply, and set it back down. "Who's that?" Owen asked, still flipping through photos. "Jessie, asking about frame sizes for the next hanging." Half an hour later, the phone rang again. Tessa stepped over to the window, talked for a couple of minutes, then came back to the table. Owen turned over another photo. "That Jesse again?" "Yeah." "He helps you a lot?" "Sometimes. We've crossed paths through work for a while now." Owen nodded and looked back at the photo. They were quiet for a few seconds. "Do you like him?" he finally asked. Tessa looked up. "Why do you want to know?" Not sure. I guess I just want to know. She smiled slightly. He's a nice guy, and yeah, he's interested in me, if that's what you're asking. Owen set the photo down on the table. Meaning? Meaning exactly that. He brought me flowers once, to a meeting where that was completely inappropriate. What'd you say? That the flowers were lovely, and the meeting was still a work meeting. Owen laughed. Fair enough. Tessa studied him more closely. Does this actually bother you? He was quiet for a moment. A little. Her smile widened. Good. Owen looked at her. Is there anything going on between you two? No. You sure? I'm sure. She narrowed her eyes slightly. Turns out you're the jealous type. I was just asking. Sure you were. Tessa picked a photo up off the table and held it out to him. Where would you hang this one? Owen took it. Are you changing the subject on purpose right now? Maybe. Then right there. Where's right there? Somewhere Jessie won't like. Tessa burst out laughing. Okay, now you're definitely jealous. Owen smiled too and shook his head. Saturday, Owen went to pick his mother up from the clinic. Tessa was already waiting at the house. She'd come to help Diane with the cucumbers she'd been planning to can all morning. The kitchen smelled of dill, garlic, and hot brine. Rows of washed jars lined the table, jar lids clattering underfoot every so often. Perfect timing, Diane said, opening the door. Tessa's already had me rewashing every single jar. There really were streaks on them, Tessa said without looking up from the cutting board. Oh, please. Owen took off his jacket and tried to squeeze in and help, only to get sent straight out of the kitchen. 2 women in this kitchen is already plenty, Diane said. A third one just gets in the way. He laughed it off and sat down at the table. A few minutes later, the 2 of them were deep in a serious argument about how much garlic to put in the next jar. Serious for about 10 seconds anyway, before they both dissolved into laughter. Here, Diane said, pulling a box of photos down from the top shelf. Tessa, want to see what this goofball looked like as a kid? Mom. What, Mom? Let her see what you grew up into. In the photo, Owen was about 5. A huge knit hat nearly swallowed his ears, a snowbank rising behind him. That's really you? Give it back. Not a chance. She backed toward the couch, clutching the photo to her chest. This is mine now. Diane laughed and went back to the jars. Owen gave up, sat down next to Tessa, and started sorting through photos with her. Every so often, he insisted the kid in some picture was actually his cousin. Sure, she'd agree. Looks just like him. Exactly. By evening, the jars lined the windowsill, cooling under dish towels. The kitchen still smelled of dill and vinegar. Tessa got ready to head home, and Owen walked her out to the car. Thanks for the cucumbers, he said. Thanks for the photos. I figured you'd give those back. Don't count on it. She smiled, got in the car, and drove off. 2 days later, Owen picked her up at her father's place again. They were heading out of town. Tessa wanted to photograph an old estate she'd recently found nearby. While Owen was helping her carry out the tripod and camera bag, Arthur stepped out of the house. Give me that, Tessa said, taking part of the equipment from Owen. I've got it. I can see how well you got it. We're about to be down a camera. She set the bag on the ground and suddenly reached toward his collar. Hold still. What? Your collar's crooked. Tessa straightened it, smoothed the fabric at his shoulder, and murmured something to him. Owen laughed. Very funny. I did warn you. Arthur paused on the front steps, watching them for a few seconds. Tessa noticed him first. Dad, we're heading out. You coming home tonight? Later. Arthur nodded. All right. He shifted his gaze to Owen. "Have a good evening." "Thank you." Owen loaded the tripod into the trunk. Tessa climbed in beside him, and they pulled out of the driveway. They drove a few minutes in silence. Then Owen said, "Your dad's figured it out, I think." Tessa turned to him. "Figured out what exactly?" "You know." She smiled. "He figured it out a while ago. Don't worry, he's not going to eat you alive." "I wasn't worried." "Liar." "Okay, a little." "I noticed." Tessa rested her hand over his on the center console. Owen glanced down at her hand for a second, then back at the road. Snow-covered houses slid past the window, and music played quietly inside the car. Sometimes, one careless game can change the course of several lives at once. For one person, it all began as a bet. For another, as a way to make some money. For someone else, it was simply about seeing how far they could push things, just for the thrill of it. And behind that other life was a real person. Someone with their own fears, their own hopes, their own trust, their own feelings. Owen lived through betrayal, lost someone he'd trusted, and reached a point where it was hard to know who he could trust at all. But maybe the most important part came after. He didn't let what happened close him off from people for good. Paige got the thing she'd once agreed to a bet for, but along with it, she lost far more than she gained. And maybe some things in life really can't be bought back, no matter how much money you have. And Tessa came into Owen's life right when he no longer had anything left to prove. She just turned out to be someone he wanted to build something real with, again. But what would you have done in Owen's place? Could you forgive someone who betrayed you that deeply, even once? Would you be able to trust anyone again after living through something like that? And most of all, could you tell the difference between someone who genuinely loves you and someone who's simply playing with your feelings? Everyone probably has their own answer to those questions, but one thing never changes. In life, it's far too easy to lose someone you can never get back again. Cherish the people who stand by you. Cherish honesty. And don't forget to tell the people close to you that you love them. Take care of yourselves.